They called it probate like it was just routine paperwork, but my sister treated that courtroom like her own coronation. My parents sat right behind her, nodding in perfect sync as her lawyer demanded an immediate transfer of everything. I let them enjoy the fantasy for exactly 5 minutes before I asked the judge to wait for the real owner of my inheritance. When the doors finally swung open, a man in a black suit walked in carrying a receipt that had finally learned how to talk. My name is Kara Bainbridge, and I have spent the last 33 years of my life watching my family operate like a cartel that deals in guilt instead of narcotics. I sat alone on the hard wooden bench in the back row of the Bristol County Probate Court. My hands folded tightly in my lap. The air in the room smelled like lemon floor polish and stale coffee, a scent that I associated with bureaucracy and bad news. Up at the front, near the judge's bench, the rest of the Bainbridge clan was putting on a performance that deserved a standing ovation, or perhaps an indictment. My sister, Marlo Bainbridge, stood at the plaintiff's table. She was wearing what fashion magazines like to call quiet luxury. It was a cashmere sweater the color of oatmeal that probably cost $2,000, paired with trousers that draped so perfectly they looked like they had been sculpted rather than sewn. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a low, severe bun that screamed sophistication. She did not look like a grieving granddaughter. She looked like a CEO closing a merger. Beside her, Gavin Rourke, her attorney, was arranging documents on the table with the precision of a surgeon preparing to amputate a limb. Rourke was the kind of lawyer who charged $600 an hour and smiled with all his teeth, but none of his eyes. He picked up a blue folder and set it down with a sharp thud that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. It was a sound designed to intimidate. It was the sound of a gavel before the judge even arrived. Behind them sat my parents, Dean and Cynthia Bainbridge. They were shoulder to shoulder, a united front of solemn, dignified sorrow. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father stared stoically ahead, his jaw set in a line of masculine grief. To anyone else in the room, they looked like a loving family devastated by the loss of their patriarch. To me, they looked like vultures circling a carcass that was not even cold yet. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer. I had bought it off the rack at a department store for $80. It fit well enough, but compared to Marlowe's bespoke armor, I might as well have been wearing a burlap sack. I worked as a compliance officer at Redwood Meridian Compliance. My job was to look at spreadsheets, find discrepancies, and tell powerful people that they were breaking the rules. It was not a glamorous job. It did not pay for vacations in the Hamptons or private Pilates sessions, but it had taught me one very important thing. It taught me that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with something to hide. And right now, Marlowe's silence was deafeningly loud. Judge Holloway entered the room. He was a man in his late 60s with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and then left out in the rain. He took his seat, the leather of his chair creaking loudly in the hush. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the docket. Matter of the estate of Arthur P. Sterling. He read, his voice gravelly. That was my grandfather, the man who had taught me how to fish, how to read a balance sheet, and how to tell the difference between a friend and a parasite. He had died 30 days ago. My family had mourned him for exactly 48 hours before the conversation shifted from his legacy to his liquidity. Gavin Rourke stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket with a quick, fluid motion. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and projecting to the back of the room. "We are here to expedite the probate process. My client, Ms. Marlo Bainbridge, is the primary beneficiary listed in the most recent will. Dated 6 months ago, given the clarity of the decedent's wishes and the unified stance of the immediate family, we are requesting an immediate transfer of all assets to the custody of Miss Bainbridge to ensure proper management." He paused for effect, letting the phrase proper management hang in the air. "The estate is substantial, Your Honor," Rourke continued. "It includes real estate holdings in 3 states, a significant investment portfolio, and liquid assets totaling upwards of $12 million. Delaying the transfer puts these assets at risk of market volatility. We have the assent of the decedent's daughter and son-in-law, Mr. and Mrs. Bainbridge, who are present today." My father nodded solemnly. My mother sniffed into her handkerchief. It was perfect. It was seamless. They wanted to bypass the usual waiting periods, bypass the scrutiny, and get their hands on the money before anyone thought to ask questions. Judge Holloway flipped through the file in front of him. He looked bored. He looked like a man who had heard this speech 5,000 times. "I see the motion," the judge said. "It seems standard enough, provided there are no contests." Marlowe turned her head slightly. She did not look at me. She looked through me. It was a look she had perfected when we were teenagers. It was the look that said I was a glitch in her perfect reality, a stain on the carpet that the housekeeping staff had forgotten to remove. She expected me to sit there and do nothing. That was my role in the family. Kara the quiet one, Kara the boring one, Kara the disappointment who worked a 9-to-5 job and drove a sedan with 100,000 miles on it. The judge looked up from his papers. He scanned the room, his eyes passing over the empty benches before landing on me in the back row. "Is there anyone present who wishes to object to the motion for immediate asset transfer?" Judge Holloway asked. The room was silent. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was 10:14 in the morning. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My palms were sweating. I was not a confrontational person. I hated scenes. I hated being the center of attention, but I remembered the last time I saw my grandfather. I remembered the way his hand shook when he held his teacup. I remembered the fear in his eyes, a fear he tried to hide with jokes and bluster. I stood up. My legs felt like they were made of lead. The wood of the bench scraped against the back of my knees. "I object, Your Honor," I said. My voice was steady, which surprised me. I had expected it to crack. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It snapped from bored routine to sharp tension. Marlowe's head whipped around. The mask of cool sophistication slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. Rourke stopped sorting his papers and turned to look at me with the expression of a man who has just found a fly in his expensive soup. My parents turned around too. My mother looked horrified, as if I had just stripped naked in church. My father's face went red. "State your name and relation to the decedent," the judge said, looking at me over the rim of his glasses. "Kara Bainbridge," I said, walking forward to the bar that separated the gallery from the legal arena. "I am the granddaughter of Arthur Sterling." "And the sister of the petitioner," Rourke added quickly, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Your Honor, this is an unfortunate family dispute. Ms. Kara Bainbridge has been estranged from the family dynamic for some time. She is likely confused about the legal standing of the will." "I am not confused," I said, ignoring the lawyer and speaking directly to the judge. "And I am not estranged. I was the one who drove him to his chemotherapy appointments 3 days a week for 5 months. I was the one who managed his grocery deliveries." Marlowe let out a sharp, derisive laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. "You bought him milk." "Kara," Marlowe said, "that hardly qualifies you to manage an estate of this magnitude." "Your Honor," Rourke cut in, "Ms. Kara Bainbridge is not named in the will we have submitted. She has no standing to object to the administration of the estate. This is a waste of the court's time and a waste of the assets we are trying to protect." I gripped the wooden railing in front of me. The varnish was sticky. "I am objecting to the immediate transfer because the will you are looking at is not the final authority on my grandfather's assets." I said, Rourke rolled his eyes, "If you are suggesting there is another will, you should have filed it. Do you have a document? Do you have a lawyer?" "I do not have a lawyer." I said, "Then sit down." "Kara," my father hissed from the row behind me. I looked at him, Dean Bainbridge, the man who had spent my entire childhood telling me I needed to be more like Marlowe, more ambitious, more polished. He was looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You are embarrassing yourself," he said, his voice low but carrying in the quiet courtroom. "You always do this. You always have to make a scene because you cannot stand that Marlowe is the one who succeeds. Just stop it. Let the adults handle this. It stung. It stung like salt in an open wound. For 33 years, those words would have made me retreat. They would have made me apologize and shrink back into the shadows. But today, I felt something different. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a compliance officer who has spotted a fraudulent transaction. I am not making a scene. Dad, I said, I am following protocol. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I am asking for a recess. Just a short one. On what grounds? The judge asked. He looked skeptical. He looked like he was about to grant Rourke's motion just to get us all out of his sight. I checked my watch. It was 10:17 in the morning. On the grounds that the real owner of the inheritance is not here yet. I said, but he will be. Marlo laughed again, but this time it sounded brittle. Who? She asked. Is Grandpa coming back from the grave? Kara? Is that your big surprise? I ignored her. I looked at the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. I am asking for 5 minutes. I told the judge. Just 5 minutes. If no one walks through those doors by 10:22, you can give Marlo everything. You can give her the house, the money, the cars. I will walk away and never say another word. Your Honor, this is ridiculous, Rourke said. We are billing the estate by the hour. This is a frivolous delay. The judge looked at me. He looked at my cheap blazer and my determined face. Then he looked at Marlo and her $3,000 coat and her lawyer's expensive suit. Perhaps he just wanted to see what would happen. Perhaps he simply did not like being told what to do by a man in a silk tie. 5 minutes, the judge said, banging his gavel once. But Ms. Bainbridge, if this is a stunt, I will hold you in contempt. Thank you, Your Honor. I remained standing at the railing. I did not go back to the bench. I did not look at my family. I could feel their eyes burning holes in my back. I could hear my mother whispering frantically to my father. I could hear Marlo tapping her perfectly manicured nails on the table. The seconds ticked by. 10:18. Kara, stop this, my father said. We can talk about a settlement. If you need money, just ask. You do not have to humiliate us. I said nothing. 10:19. Marlo leaned over to her lawyer. They whispered. Rourke shook his head and smirked. They were confident. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I was having a breakdown. 10:20. The silence in the room grew heavy. It pressed against my eardrums. The clerk typed something on her computer. The keys clacking loudly. A fly buzzed against one of the high windows. Trying to escape. 10:21. My confidence began to waver. Had I gotten the time wrong? Had something happened? I had received the email instructions 2 days ago. They had been precise. They had been absolute. But what if I had been played? What if this was all a joke? Marlo stood up. Time is up, Your Honor, she said. She sounded triumphant. She sounded like she had won the lottery, which, in a way, she thought she had. My sister is clearly unwell. We should proceed. The judge looked at the clock. Ms. Bainbridge, he said to me, it seems your 5 minutes are up. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. I gripped the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. And then I heard it, the heavy thud of the latch on the double doors. The sound was solid and undeniable. It cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned. Even the judge looked up. The doors swung open. A man walked in. He was not familiar to me. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches. With broad shoulders, he wore a black suit. It was not a fashion statement like Rourke's suit. It was a uniform. It was perfectly tailored, unpretentious, and serious. His shirt was crisp white. His tie was black. He carried a thick leather portfolio under one arm. He did not look like a lawyer. He did not look like a family friend. He looked like a receipt that had finally learned how to talk. He walked down the center aisle with a stride that was measured and precise. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at my parents, who were staring at him with open mouths. He did not look at Marlo, whose face had gone from triumphant to confused. He did not even look at Rourke. He walked straight to the front of the room, past the bar where I stood, and approached the court clerk's desk. He moved with the efficiency of a machine. Who are you? Judge Holloway asked, leaning forward. The man stopped. He placed the leather portfolio on the clerk's desk. He did not open it yet. He turned slowly, not to address the judge, but to scan the room. His eyes were cold and gray, like the Atlantic Ocean in winter. They swept over Marlowe without pausing, dismissing her as irrelevant. They swept over my parents. Finally, his gaze landed on me. He nodded, once, a curt, professional acknowledgement. Then he turned back to the room, his voice deep and clear. Filling the space without shouting, he spoke 2 words, and they hit the silence like a sledgehammer. Kara Bainbridge. The man did not wait for an invitation. He did not ask for permission to approach the bench. He simply moved with the inexorable momentum of a glacier, placing the thick portfolio onto the judge's elevated desk with a sound that was less of a thud and more of a heavy, final decree. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said. His voice was devoid of accent or inflection, a perfect neutral vessel for facts. "I am the Senior Account Manager for Irongate Fiduciary Trust Services. I am here on behalf of the Arthur P. Sterling Irrevocable Trust." The silence that followed was absolute. In the legal world, the word trust changes the temperature of a room. A will is a suggestion that can be argued. A trust, specifically an irrevocable one managed by a corporate fiduciary like Irongate, is a fortress. Judge Holloway peered over his spectacles, his eyebrows knitting together. He reached out and took the portfolio. He opened the first page. I watched his eyes scan the header. I saw the moment the realization hit him. His posture, which had been slumped in boredom only minutes ago, stiffened. He sat up straighter. He flipped the page, then another, his speed increasing. "Mr. Rourke," the judge said, not looking up. "You filed a motion for the immediate distribution of assets under the probate estate of Arthur Sterling. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Gavin Rourke said. He sounded cautious now. The shark had sensed blood in the water, but for the first time, he was realizing it might be his own. "We believe the probate estate covers the entirety of the decedent's holdings." The judge laughed. It was a dry, humorless bark. "You believe wrong," Judge Holloway said. He lifted a stack of documents from the portfolio and held them up. The paper was heavy, bonded stock, the kind used for treaties and declarations of war. "According to this instrument," the judge continued, "the vast majority of Arthur Sterling's assets, including the real estate in Bristol, the investment accounts at Vanguard, and the primary residence, were retitled into the Arthur P. Sterling Dynasty Trust exactly 6 months ago, upon his death, 30 days ago. That trust became irrevocable." Marlowe made a noise. It was a sharp intake of breath, like a seal breaking on a vacuum-packed jar. She took a half-step forward, her high heels clicking aggressively on the parquet floor. "That is impossible," she said. Her voice was too high, tight with a panic she was struggling to strangle. "We have the will. The will leaves everything to the family. Grandpa told us. He told us explicitly that he was leaving the house to me." Elias Thorne did not turn to face her. He addressed the judge, his hands clasped behind his back. "The pour-over will in your possession is valid, Your Honor," Thorne said. "However, it only governs assets left outside the trust. As of the date of death, the value of the probate estate, the assets actually under this court's jurisdiction, amounts to one checking account containing approximately $4,000 and a used 1998 Ford pickup truck. Everything else belongs to Irongate. $4,000. The number hung in the air. My parents exchanged a look of pure horror. They had already spent more than that on the funeral flowers. They had probably spent more than that on lunch before coming here. Rourke stepped in, trying to physically block his client from the judge's line of sight. He was in damage control mode, trying to salvage a hull that had already been breached. "Your Honor, even if a trust exists, this court maintains equitable jurisdiction over the validity of that instrument," Rourke argued, his voice rising. "If these assets were moved 6 months ago, during a period when the decedent's health was in rapid decline, We have significant grounds to question the validity of the transfer. We demand to see the trust instrument immediately." Judge Holloway looked at the lawyer with an expression of profound irritation. "You do not demand anything in my courtroom." "Mr. Rourke," the judge snapped, "and you are putting the cart before the horse." The judge looked back at the documents. He ran a finger down a specific paragraph on page 3. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "does this document contain what I think it contains?" Thorne nodded once. "Section 9, paragraph 4. Your Honor, the no contest clause." I saw Rourke freeze. He knew what that meant. Every lawyer knew what that meant. A no contest clause was the nuclear option in estate planning. It meant that if any beneficiary challenged the validity of the trust or the distribution of assets, they would automatically forfeit whatever inheritance they were originally slated to receive. It was a mechanism designed to stop greedy families from tearing each other apart in court. Or, in my grandfather's case, it was a trap designed to catch a predator. Judge Holloway read the text aloud, his voice echoing in the chamber. "If any beneficiary under this trust, or any person claiming an interest in my estate, contests the validity of this trust, or any of its provisions, or institutes any legal proceeding to set aside this trust, then all benefits provided for such beneficiary are revoked, and said beneficiary shall be treated as if they had predeceased me without issue." The judge lowered the paper. He looked directly at Marlowe. "Ms. Bainbridge," he said, "did you know about this trust?" Marlowe was gripping the edge of the plaintiff's table so hard that her knuckles were the color of bone. She was not grieving. She was calculating. I could see the wheels turning in her head, spinning frantically to find an angle, a lie, a way out. She had walked into this room expecting a coronation, and now she was standing on a trapdoor with a rope around her neck. He was confused. Marlowe stammered. She looked at our parents for support, but they were staring at the floor, distancing themselves from the blast radius. Grandpa was on heavy medication at the end. He did not know what he was signing. He was easily influenced. If Kara or some stranger got him to sign these papers, it was coercion. It was elder abuse. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She was there every day," Marlowe said, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "She kept us away. She poisoned him against us. This trust is a fraud. It was the move I had expected. It was the only move she had left. If she could prove the trust was signed under duress or lack of capacity, the no contest clause would not matter, because the whole document would be void. She was betting everything on the idea that our grandfather was a senile old man who could be tricked." Elias Thorne reached into his portfolio again. He did not look hurried. He looked like a man who had brought a machine gun to a knife fight. "Your Honor," Thorne said, anticipating exactly this allegation. "Mr. Sterling instructed us to include a supplementary evidentiary packet." He pulled out a second, thinner file and handed it to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. "This packet contains 3 things," Thorne listed, ticking them off on his fingers. "First, a notarized affidavit of mental capacity from Dr. Alan Evans, the chief of neurology at Providence Memorial Hospital, dated the morning the trust was signed. It states that Mr. Sterling scored 30 out of 30 on the cognitive assessment and was fully oriented to time, place, and purpose." Marlowe's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Second," Thorne continued, "we have the sworn statements of 2 independent witnesses who were present during the signing. Neither witness is a beneficiary. Neither witness is related to the family. One is a retired federal judge. The other is the chief ethics officer of the Rhode Island Bar Association." The judge raised his eyebrows. Those were heavy hitters. You did not bribe a retired federal judge to witness a fake will. "And third," Thorne said, delivering the final blow, "we have a certificate of independent review from a third-party attorney who met with Mr. Sterling privately, without Miss Kara Bainbridge present, to confirm that this trust represented his sole and voluntary intent, free of any undue influence." The room went silent again. This was not just a defense. This was a fortress wall made of diamond. My grandfather had not just written a trust. He had bulletproofed it. He had anticipated every lie Marlo would tell, every accusation she would throw, and he had built a shield against it 6 months before he died. Judge Holloway looked through the supplementary packet. He nodded slowly. "This is thorough," the judge murmured. He looked up at Marlo. The look was no longer one of boredom or irritation. It was a look of warning. "Ms. Bainbridge," the judge said, "your counsel has filed a motion to transfer all assets to you immediately. That motion is based on the assertion that the probate estate is the controlling entity. However, if I recognize this trust, and given this evidence, I see no reason why I would not. Then your motion could be construed as a legal proceeding to set aside the trust's provisions." The judge leaned forward. "Do you understand what I'm telling you? If you persist in this claim, if you argue that this trust is invalid due to incapacity when I have a neurologist's affidavit right here saying otherwise, you might be triggering the no contest clause right now. You could be wiping out your own inheritance." Rourke grabbed Marlo's arm. He whispered furiously into her ear. I could not hear the words, but I could read the body language. He was telling her to stop. He was telling her to retreat. He was telling her that they had walked into an ambush and needed to regroup. But Marlo was not used to retreating. She was a Bainbridge. She was the golden child. She had never been told no in her entire life without getting a manager involved. She pulled her arm away from Rourke. "I am not withdrawing anything," Marlo hissed. Her face was flushed. "This is ridiculous. That money belongs to the family. It belongs to me. I am the executor of the will. I have rights." The judge sat back. He looked at the no contest clause again. Then he looked at Marlo. He looked like a man watching someone pull the pin on a grenade and refuse to throw it. "Mr. Thorne," the judge asked, "does the trust provide anything for Miss Marlo Bainbridge?" Thorne did not consult his papers. He knew the answer. "It does, Your Honor. The trust provides a specific distribution schedule for Ms. Bainbridge, subject to her compliance with the terms of the trust. And if the no contest clause is triggered," the judge asked, "then her interest is terminated immediately," Thorne said, "and her share is redistributed to the remaining beneficiaries." The air in the room seemed to vibrate. The stakes had just gone from a procedural delay to a $12 million gamble. Marlo glared at me. Her eyes were full of venom. She wanted me to flinch. She wanted me to look guilty. She wanted to believe her own lie, that I had manipulated a sick old man to steal her birthright. But I was not thinking about the money. I was thinking about the day my grandfather signed those papers. I was thinking about how he had sat in his armchair, frail but fierce, and told me, "Kara, they see me as a checkbook. They think I do not know, but I know. I want you to promise me something. When the time comes, do not argue with them. Do not fight them. Just let the paper do the work." I looked at the judge. I saw him wavering, deciding whether to rule on the motion or dismiss it. He needed a push. He needed to know that this was not just a clerical error. "Ms. Kara Bainbridge," the judge said, turning to me, "you are the one who objected. Do you have anything to add regarding the validity of this trust?" I stepped up to the microphone. My hands were shaking, just a little, but I placed them flat on the wooden surface to steady them. I looked at Marlo. I looked at my parents, who were now staring at me with a mix of fear and hatred. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that the power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the daughter who audited spreadsheets. I was the one holding the match. I took a breath. The air tasted different now. It tasted clean. I did not come here to tell a story, Your Honor, I said quietly. My voice was amplified by the microphone, filling the courtroom. Marlo has plenty of stories. She has stories about how sick Grandpa was. She has stories about how much he loved her. She has stories about how I am the villain. I paused. I looked at the black-suited man, Elias Thorne. He offered me the slightest of nods. "I came here to let the file speak," I said. "My grandfather spent 50 years building his company. He valued facts. He valued written records. He knew exactly who his family was. He knew that the moment he was gone, they would try to rewrite history to fit their bank accounts." I pointed at the thick portfolio on the judge's desk. That trust is not a manipulation. Your Honor, it is a mirror. It shows exactly who my grandfather was, and it shows exactly who my sister is. If she wants to break the mirror because she does not like her reflection, that is her choice. But she should know that broken glass cuts. Marlowe gasped. My father stood up, his face purple. Kara, that is enough, he shouted. You are ungrateful. Sit down. Mr. Bainbridge, Judge Holloway roared, banging his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. My father sank back into his seat, looking deflated. The judge looked at the papers one last time. He looked at the affidavit from the neurologist. He looked at the certificate from the independent lawyer. Then he looked at Marlowe's motion, a flimsy piece of paper demanding everything based on nothing but entitlement. He closed the file. I am taking the motion for immediate transfer under advisement, the judge said. His voice was cold. And I am scheduling a hearing for 10 days from now to determine the status of the trust assets. He looked directly at Marlowe. And Ms. Bainbridge, I suggest you use those 10 days to read this trust document very carefully, specifically Section 9, Paragraph 4. Because if you come back into my courtroom and pursue this line of argument without something more substantial than your own indignation, I will not only validate the trust, I will personally oversee the enforcement of the forfeiture clause. Marlowe looked like she had been slapped. She stood there, frozen, as the judge gathered his robe and stood up. Court is adjourned, the bailiff called out. The judge disappeared into his chambers. The room erupted into movement. Rourke was already packing his briefcase, his face grim. He grabbed Marlowe's arm and began steering her toward the exit, whispering furiously about damage control. My parents scrambled after them, casting dark looks in my direction, but too afraid of the mysterious Mr. Thorne to approach me. Elias Thorne waited until they were gone. He walked over to where I was standing. Up close, he smelled of starch and expensive ink. Ms. Bainbridge, he said. Mr. Thorne, I replied. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a plain white business card. It had no logo, just a name and a phone number embossed in black. Your grandfather spoke highly of you, he said. He said you were the only one who understood that value is not the same thing as price. I took the card. It felt heavy, like it was made of something denser than paper. Is it over? I asked. Thorne looked at the door where my family had fled. His expression did not change, but his eyes seemed to darken. No, he said, the trust protects the assets, but it does not protect you from their reaction. You embarrassed them. You took away their prize. People like your sister do not accept defeat. They escalate. He turned to leave, then paused. I suggest you do not go home tonight, Ms. Bainbridge, or if you do not answer the door. Why? I asked. Because, Thorne said, adjusting his cuff. The no contest clause is a financial threat, but desperate people rarely stick to financial weapons. He turned and walked out of the courtroom, moving with that same silent, terrifying precision. I stood alone in the empty room, holding the card. I had won the first round. I had stopped the immediate theft of my grandfather's legacy. But as the adrenaline faded, I realized that Thorne was right. I hadn't just won a legal argument, I had declared war. And the Bainbridges did not fight fair. The 10-day recess Judge Holloway had granted felt less like a pause and more like the slow, grinding retraction of a catapult before the stone is launched. When we returned to the Bristol County Probate Court, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The air was no longer stale with boredom. It was electric with the ozone scent of impending violence. Marlowe had changed her strategy. During the initial hearing, she had played the role of the grieving, confused granddaughter just wanting to fulfill her grandfather's wishes. Today, the quiet luxury was gone. She wore a suit of sharp, aggressive navy blue, her hair pulled back so tight it pulled at the corners of her eyes. She did not look at me with dismissal anymore. She looked at me with the focused, predatory intent of a creature that realizes its prey has teeth. Gavin Rourke, her lawyer, wasted no time. He stood before Judge Holloway, his posture rigid. He knew the trust document Elias Thorne had presented was ironclad. He knew he could not attack the paper, so he had decided to attack the person holding the pen. "Your Honor," Rourke began, his voice dropping an octave to convey grave concern, "we are not contesting the existence of the trust document. We are contesting the circumstances of its creation. Over the past 10 days, we have uncovered disturbing details regarding Ms. Kara Bainbridge's conduct during the final 6 months of Arthur Sterling's life. I sat at the defendant's table. Although technically I was not a defendant, I certainly felt like one. Elias Thorne sat beside me, as immovable as a statue. He did not react. He simply opened his leather notebook and uncapped a fountain pen. "Go on," Judge Holloway said. He did not look impressed. He looked like a man waiting for a punchline he already knew was not going to be funny. "We assert that this trust is the product of undue influence, coercion, and elder abuse," Rourke declared. He pointed a finger at me, a theatrical gesture that felt rehearsed in a mirror. Ms. Bainbridge systematically isolated the decedent. She controlled his phone. She screened his visitors. She created a fortress of solitude around a dying man to manipulate his paranoia and turn him against his loving family. My mother, Cynthia, let out a sob. It was a perfect, choked sound. She was dabbing her eyes again, but this time she looked at the judge with the pleading eyes of a mother whose child had been stolen. "She kept us away," my mother whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "We just wanted to see Dad. We just wanted to say goodbye. But she told us he was too sick. She told us he did not want to see us. She lied to him about us." My father, Dean, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, nodding grimly. "She poisoned him, Your Honor," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She took advantage of a confused old man to write herself a lottery ticket." I felt a cold fire ignite in my chest. I remembered those 6 months. I remembered sitting by my grandfather's bed while he vomited from the chemotherapy. I remembered calling my parents, begging them to come visit, only to be told they were in Cabo, or they were renovating the kitchen, or they just could not handle the hospital smell right now. I remembered holding the phone to his ear while it rang and rang, unanswered. I started to stand up, but Thorne placed a hand on my forearm. His grip was firm. "Do not engage," he murmured. "Let them dig." Judge Holloway looked at my parents, then back at Rourke. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in the silence. "That is a very serious accusation, Mr. Rourke," the judge said. "Undue influence, elder abuse. These are felonies. If what you say is true, this is not just a probate matter. This is a criminal matter." "Exactly, Your Honor," Rourke said, looking triumphant. "So," the judge continued, his voice hardening, "I assume you have the evidence to back this up. Where are the police reports?" Rourke blinked. "Excuse me? If Ms. Bainbridge was holding a dying man hostage and refusing access to his family." "Surely you called the police," the judge said. "Surely you called Adult Protective Services. If you were so concerned for his welfare that you are now accusing his caretaker of abuse, I assume there is a paper trail of your frantic attempts to save him?" Rourke shifted his weight. "Well, Your Honor, the family tried to handle it privately. They did not want to embarrass Mr. Sterling." "Did you file a complaint with the hospital social worker?" the judge asked. "Did you speak to his primary care physician about this isolation?" We were blocked at every turn," Rourke stammered. The judge picked up a pen and tapped it rhythmically against his desk. "So you are telling me," Judge Holloway said, speaking slowly and clearly, "that despite being his daughter and son-in-law, despite being wealthy and resourceful people, you allowed this alleged abuse to continue for 6 months without filing a single official report, and you only decided it was a crime 3 weeks after you found out you were not getting the money?" My father's face flushed a deep, angry red. "We trusted her," he shouted. "We thought she was taking care of him." "Sit down, Mr. Bainbridge," the judge snapped. Rourke, sensing he was losing the narrative, pivoted quickly. "Your Honor, we have witnesses, family members who saw the dynamic firsthand." He gestured to the back of the courtroom. "Call Brenda Sterling and Michael Vance. I turned around. Two of my cousins were shuffling their way to the front. Brenda was my mother's niece, a woman who had spent her entire life trying to borrow money for business schemes that never materialized. Michael was a distant cousin who only showed up at Christmas if there was an open bar. They looked terrified. They walked past me, keeping their eyes glued to the floor. Marlo was staring at them, her eyes wide and unblinking, a silent command to stick to the script. Brenda took the stand first. She swore to tell the truth, but her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it up. "Ms. Sterling?" Rourke asked. "Did you ever try to visit Arthur Sterling in his final months?" "Yes," Brenda said, her voice barely a whisper. "And what happened?" Kara said he was sleeping." Brenda said, "She said he did not want visitors. Did that seem unusual to you?" "Well, yes," Brenda said, glancing nervously at Marlo. "Uncle Artie always loved company. It felt weird, like she was guarding him. Did Arthur ever call you?" Rourke pressed. "No," Brenda said. "And why do you think that was?" I guess Kara did not let him." She mumbled. "Thank you," Rourke said. Judge Holloway looked at Brenda. "Ms. Sterling? When was the last time you visited Arthur Sterling before he got sick?" Brenda froze. I think maybe Thanksgiving? 2 years ago? And did you call him during those 2 years?" "Life gets busy," Brenda said defensively. The judge dismissed her with a wave of his hand. He did not even bother with Michael. He saw exactly what this was. These were not witnesses. They were hostages. They were people who had been promised a slice of the pie if they helped bake it, or perhaps threatened with exile if they refused. Rourke, sweating now, tried to throw a Hail Mary pass. "Your Honor, clearly there is a pattern here. We need to get to the truth. We are requesting full discovery. We want access to Ms. Bainbridge's emails, her text messages, her phone records for the last year. We want to depose the nurses and the housekeepers. We need to see the extent of her manipulation." Judge Holloway laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Mr. Rourke, discovery is a tool for finding facts." The judge said, "It is not a fishing license you get to use after you walk into my courtroom and throw a bomb. You do not get to accuse someone of a crime with zero evidence and then demand access to their private life to see if you can find something to justify the accusation." Elias Thorne stood up. He did not slam his hand on the table. He did not raise his voice. He simply commanded the space. "Your Honor." Thorne said, "If I may, Irongate Fiduciary Trust Services does not facilitate trusts for coerced individuals. Our intake process is rigorous." Thorne held up a document. "Mr. Sterling met with our intake team 4 separate times. He met with the drafting attorney 6 times. On every single occasion, he requested that Ms. Kara Bainbridge leave the room. He was adamant that she not be involved in the legal planning specifically to protect her from exactly these kinds of accusations." Thorne turned to look at Marlo. "Mr. Sterling told us, and I quote from his intake notes, 'They will say she made me do it. So I want you to record that I am doing this because she is the only one who never asked me for a dime.'" The words hung in the air. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had not known that. I had not known he said that. Marlo looked like she was vibrating. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. The facade of the concerned sister was cracking, revealing the panicked, desperate woman underneath. Judge Holloway looked at the Bainbridges. His gaze was no longer just skeptical. It was suspicious. "You know," the judge said, leaning forward, "usually, when I see cases of undue influence, the influencer is the one trying to hide things. They are the ones trying to rush the process. They are the ones trying to bypass the rules." He looked at the motion papers Rourke had filed 10 days ago. The motion to transfer everything immediately. Ms. Kara Bainbridge asked for nothing but for the proper executor to be present. The judge observed, "You, Ms. Marlo Bainbridge, asked for everything. Right now, with no questions asked, you tried to rush this court. You tried to bury the existence of a trust." The judge's eyes narrowed. If anyone was applying pressure to Arthur Sterling, If anyone was trying to force an outcome, the evidence suggests it might be the people sitting behind the plaintiff's table. It was a direct hit. The judge was flipping the script. He was suggesting that maybe the reason they were so sure I had manipulated him was because they had been trying to manipulate him and failed. "That is a lie," Marlo screamed. The sound tore through the courtroom. She stood up, knocking her chair back. It clattered loudly against the railing behind her. "Marlo," Rourke hissed, reaching for her. She pulled away from him. Her face was twisted. "He promised me," Marlo shouted, pointing at the empty witness stand where her grandfather's ghost seemed to linger. "He promised me that house. He knew I needed it. He knew the plan." "Ms. Bainbridge, sit down," the judge ordered. "He owed us," Marlo yelled, her voice breaking into a hysterical shriek. "After everything that happened, after what he did, he owed us this. He had to fix it." The room went dead silent. Even Rourke looked horrified. He stared at his client as if she had just pulled a live grenade out of her designer handbag and pulled the pin with her teeth. "He owed us. He had to fix it." I sat there, frozen. Those words echoed in my head. He owed us. This was not about inheritance. This was not about greed. Or at least, not only about greed. You do not say someone owes you an inheritance. You say they promised it, or they wanted you to have it. You only say they owe you if there is a debt. I looked at my parents. My father had gone pale, a sickly, ash-gray color. My mother had stopped her fake crying and was staring at Marlo with wide, terrified eyes, shaking her head slightly, a silent plea for her to shut up. They were not grieving. They were not even just greedy. They were afraid. I looked at Elias Thorne. He was watching them too, his eyes narrowing slightly. He had caught it. He had heard the shift in tense, the shift in motive. Judge Holloway slowly lowered his gavel. He did not bang it. He just set it down. "What did he owe you?" "Ms. Bainbridge?" the judge asked. His voice was very quiet. Marlo seemed to realize what she had done. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her standing there, exposed and trembling. She looked at our parents. She saw the fear on their faces. She realized she had strayed off the map of the lie and into the territory of a dangerous truth. He was our father," Marlo stammered, trying to walk it back. "He owed us his loyalty. He owed us his support." The judge stared at her for a long time. "He did not buy it. Nobody in the room bought it. You said he had to fix it." The judge said, "Fix what?" Marlo sank back into her chair. She looked small now. "Just family stuff," she whispered. "Just misunderstandings." Judge Holloway looked at Rourke. "Mr. Rourke, your client just suggested that the decedent was under an obligation to transfer assets to her to settle a debt or fix a situation. That sounds remarkably like a contract. Not a bequest, and if there was a contract, and you are trying to enforce it through a will contest while hiding the nature of that contract." The judge let the sentence hang there. "I am denying your request for discovery," Judge Holloway ruled, "and I am issuing a warning. We are going to proceed with the validation of the trust. And while we do that, I am going to be looking very closely at the motivations of all parties involved. If I find out that this court is being used to launder a blackmail scheme or cover up a crime, the consequences will be severe." He looked at me. "Ms. Kara Bainbridge," the judge said, "do you have any knowledge of what your sister is referring to? What your grandfather might have needed to fix?" I stood up slowly. I felt the weight of the room on my shoulders. I looked at my parents. My father was staring at me, his eyes hard, transmitting a silent threat. "Don't you dare!" But the truth was, I did not know. I honestly did not know. My grandfather had never mentioned a debt. He had never mentioned a mistake. He had only mentioned that he wanted to be safe. "No, Your Honor," I said clearly, "I do not know, but I intend to find out." The judge nodded. "Hearing adjourned for 48 hours, Judge Holloway said. "I want both parties back here with their final arguments regarding the standing of the trust. And Mr. Rourke, if your client has another outburst like that, I will hold her in contempt." The gavel banged. As the room cleared, I did not look at Marlowe. I looked at my father. He was not looking at the judge or the lawyers. He was looking at his phone, typing furiously. Thorne leaned in close to me. "Did you hear it?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "He owed us. That is not probate language." Thorne said, "That is leverage language." He closed his notebook. "Your grandfather was afraid of them," Thorne said. "We assumed he was afraid of their greed, but greed is predictable. What are you saying?" I asked. "I am saying," Thorne replied, watching my parents hurry out of the courtroom, that people do not usually coerce their parents into signing trusts unless they have something to hold over them. Marlowe just admitted there was a transaction. He had to fix it. He looked at me with those cold, gray eyes. We need to find out what it is before they destroy the evidence. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I had thought this was a battle over money. I had thought I was fighting entitlement. But now I realized I was fighting something much darker. My family was not just trying to get rich. They were trying to bury a body, metaphorically, or perhaps, given the look on my father's face, quite literally. The man in the black suit turned to me. "Ms. Bainbridge," Thorne said, "I think it is time we opened the sealed file." "What sealed file?" I asked. "The one your grandfather instructed me to open only if the family explicitly claimed he owed them." Thorne said, "I thought it was a figure of speech." Apparently, he was being literal. He picked up the thick portfolio. "Come with me," he said. "We have work to do." The courtroom was silent. But it was not the peaceful silence of a library. It was the suffocating, heavy silence of a bomb squad watching a timer count down. Elias Thorne did not look at me. He did not look at the Bainbridges. He simply reached into his briefcase and produced a single, thin envelope. It was white, sealed with red wax that looked archaic and dangerously formal against the sterile laminate of the defense table. "Your Honor," Thorne said, his voice level and unyielding, "this is a letter of instruction, Mr. Sterling entrusted this to Irongate with a very specific condition. It was to remain sealed unless his family formally contested the trust or accused his granddaughter of misconduct." He slid the envelope across the polished wood toward the bench. "Since both of those conditions have now been met," Thorne continued, "the instructions mandate that it be opened and read into the record." Judge Holloway looked at the envelope. He looked at the red wax seal. Then he looked at Gavin Rourke, who was standing very still, like a man who realizes he has just stepped on a landmine but has not yet lifted his foot. "Objection," Rourke said, though his voice lacked its usual oily confidence. "This is a surprise document. We have not had a chance to authenticate the handwriting. We do not know if the decedent was in a sound state of mind when he wrote this. The judge picked up a silver letter opener. That is what we are here to determine." "Mr. Rourke," Judge Holloway said. He slit the envelope open. The sound of tearing paper was sharp and violent in the quiet room. He pulled out a single sheet of yellow legal pad paper. It was not typed. It was handwritten in the jagged and forceful scrawl of an old man who was fighting against the tremors in his own hands. The judge adjusted his glasses. He read the first few lines silently. His expression, which had been stern but professional, suddenly hardened into something brittle and cold. The color seemed to drain from his face, replaced by a flush of anger that started at his collar and worked its way up. He looked up from the page. He stared directly at my father, Dean Bainbridge. It was a look of such intense disappointment and judgment that I saw my father physically flinch. Shrinking back into his tailored suit. "Read it, Your Honor," Thorne said softly. Judge Holloway took a breath. He cleared his throat. To the presiding judge, he began reading, his voice echoing off the high walls. "If this letter is being read in your courtroom, it means that my son, Dean, and his family are trying to rob my estate by blaming my granddaughter, Kara." A gasp rippled through the room. It did not come from the gallery. It came from my mother. She pressed her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and terrified. Marlowe went rigid, her spine snapping straight as if she had been electrocuted. The judge continued reading. "They will tell you I was sick. I was. They will tell you I was confused. I was not. They will tell you that Kara forced her way into my home to control me. That is a lie. I asked her to come. I begged her to come. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. I remembered that phone call. I remembered his voice, small and frightened, asking if I could come over for a few days because he had fallen in the shower and did not want to tell Dean because Dean would put him in a home. A few days had turned into 6 months. The judge's voice grew steadier, more rhythmic, channeling the anger of the dead man. After I fell in the bathroom in August, Dean did not ask if I was hurt. He asked if I had updated my power of attorney. He asked if the house title was clean. That was when I knew. They were not waiting for me to die. They were waiting for me to become useless so they could take the signature authority while I was still breathing. Marlo was shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "That is not true." He was paranoid. Judge Holloway ignored her. He read on. "I brought Kara in because she was the only one who looked at me and saw a person, not a vault. But her presence made them desperate. They knew she would not let them bully me. So they waited. They waited for the nights she went to the pharmacy. They waited for the afternoons she went to her office to file reports." The judge paused. He flipped the page. He looked at the next paragraph, and his eyes narrowed. "There is a specific incident I want on the record." The judge read, "It was the night of November 12th. Kara had gone to pick up my pain medication. It was 11:30 at night. My doorbell rang. I thought she had forgotten her keys. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. I remembered that night. The pharmacy had been 24 hours, but there had been a line. I had been gone for 45 minutes. I opened the door. The judge read, it was Dean and Marlo, and they had a stranger with them, a woman with a notary stamp bag. They came into my living room. They did not ask how I was. Dean put a stack of papers on the coffee table. He told me it was for insurance. He told me I had to sign it right then, or I would lose my coverage. I looked at my father. He was staring at the floor, his face ashen. Marlo was staring straight ahead. Her jaw set so hard, I thought her teeth might crack. I put on my glasses. The letter continued. It was not insurance. It was a quitclaim deed for the house and a full durable power of attorney granting Marlo immediate control over my accounts. They brought a mobile notary to my house at midnight to ambush me while my granddaughter was buying my medicine. The judge stopped reading. He lowered the paper. He looked at the defense table. He looked at the plaintiff's table. They told me to sign. The judge read, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Dean said, "Just do it, Dad. You are not capable anymore. Let us handle it." I told them to get out. I told them if they did not leave, I would call the police. The notary got scared. She said she would not notarize a signature under duress, and she ran out. Dean and Marlo followed her, cursing. The judge placed the letter on the bench. He folded his hands over it. November 12th. Judge Holloway said. He looked at my father. "Mr. Bainbridge." The judge said, "Who was the notary?" My father did not answer. He looked like he was trying to swallow something sharp. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Rourke, but Rourke was busy shuffling papers, trying to find a way to disappear. "I asked you a question," the judge thundered. "Who brought a mobile notary to a dying man's house at midnight?" It was a misunderstanding," my father croaked. "We were concerned about his assets. We thought he needed help." "So you admit it?" the judge asked. "You admit you tried to force a signature?" "We did not force anything," Marlo snapped, unable to help herself. "We asked him to sign. He was making bad decisions. We were trying to protect the estate." "By tricking him?" the judge asked. "By lying about insurance papers?" He was confused. Marlo shouted, he did not know what was good for him. And yet, the judge said, holding up the letter, he seems to recall the events with remarkable clarity. Elias Thorne stood up again. He held another document in his hand. "Your Honor," Thorne said, anticipating that the family might claim this letter is a fabrication or a product of paranoia. Mr. Sterling took an additional step that night. Thorne handed the document to the clerk. After the family left, Mr. Sterling called his estate planning attorney, Robert Vance, and left a voicemail. He also called the official time and weather service to create a timestamp on his call log. Thorne pointed to the paper. This is the call log from Mr. Sterling's landline provider. November 12th, 11:48 p.m., a call to Attorney Vance's office, lasting 4 minutes, followed immediately by a call to the time service. And here is the transcript of the voicemail he left for Mr. Vance, certified by a forensic audio specialist. Thorne read from the transcript. Robert, this is Arthur. They just left. Dean and Marlowe. They brought a notary. They tried to make me sign over the house. I kicked them out. But Robert, I am scared. They are not going to stop. I need to sign that trust. I need to sign it now. And I need to make sure Kara is safe. They are going to come for her when I am gone. The words hung in the air like smoke. They were not just legal arguments. They were the final, desperate plea of a man who realized his own blood relatives were predators. Objection! Rourke yelled, standing up. This is hearsay. The decedent is not here to be cross-examined. This is a one-sided account designed to paint my clients in a bad light. Overruled, Judge Holloway said instantly. But Your Honor, Rourke protested, it is classic hearsay. It falls under the state of mind exception. Mr. Rourke, the judge shouted back, and frankly, it is bolstered by the fact that your clients just admitted to being there. You cannot claim the event did not happen when your client just tried to justify it. The judge looked at the call logs. He looked at the letter. This establishes a clear pattern. Judge Holloway said, it establishes that 6 months ago, Arthur Sterling was not the one being manipulated. He was the one under siege, and he sought the protection of a trust specifically to defend himself against the people sitting in this courtroom. He turned his gaze to me. Ms. Bainbridge, the judge asked, did you know about this letter? I shook my head slowly. I felt numb. I had known my grandfather was anxious. I had known he did not trust them, but I had never known about the notary. I had never known they came that night while I was gone. No, Your Honor, I said. I knew he was afraid. He told me once, I have prepared something, but he never told me what it was. He never told me about the letter. He kept it from you. The judge noted. Why do you think that is? I swallowed hard. Because he knew I would have called the police. I said, and he did not want his son to go to jail. He loved them, even when they were trying to rob him. My mother let out a loud, wailing sob. It might have been real this time. It was the sound of shame finally piercing through the layers of denial. The judge looked at the family with disgust. The credibility of the plaintiffs is severely damaged, Judge Holloway said. This letter, combined with the call logs and the admission of the midnight visit, paints a picture of attempted financial exploitation. He leaned forward. I am admitting the letter of instruction into evidence, and I'm serving notice to the plaintiffs. If you continue to pursue this claim of undue influence against Ms. Kara Bainbridge, you are doing so in the face of direct evidence that the only undue influence being exerted was by you. Rourke looked defeated. He sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. He knew the case was crumbling. The trust was valid. The will contest was dead in the water. But Marlowe was not looking at the judge. She was not looking at Rourke. I watched her. She had pulled her phone out of her purse. She was typing furiously, her thumbs flying across the screen. Her face was not the face of someone who was grieving or even someone who was defeated. It was the face of someone who was executing Plan B. She finished typing. She hit send. Then, with a sharp, deliberate motion, she slammed the phone face down on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. She placed her hand over it, pressing it into the wood, as if she were trying to physically smother the message she had just released into the world. She looked up. Her eyes met mine. There was no fear in them anymore. There was only a cold, reptile malice. She offered me a tiny, tight smile. Thorne nudged me under the table. He had seen it too. What did she just do? I whispered. I do not know. Thorne whispered back, his voice grim. But whatever it is not a legal maneuver. It is a grenade. The judge began to speak about scheduling the next phase, but I could not hear him. All I could hear was the echo of that phone hitting the table. Marlowe had realized she could not win inside this room, so she had just sent a command to destroy me outside of it. The gavel did not bang this time. It fell with the heavy, muted thud of a guillotine blade that had finally completed its descent. Judge Holloway did not look at the papers anymore. He looked at Gavin Rourke, and the expression on his face was one of professional pity, mixed with judicial exhaustion. The air in the courtroom had shifted from the tense electricity of a battle to the cold, sterile atmosphere of a morgue where a cause of death was being pronounced. The motion for immediate transfer of assets is denied with prejudice, Judge Holloway stated. His voice was flat, carrying the weight of finality. Marlowe did not flinch. She sat frozen, her hand still pressing her phone into the table as if she were trying to crush the device into the wood. My parents, however, seemed to shrink. The denial was expected after the letter, but the judge was not finished. He picked up a calendar from his desk. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am scheduling a sanctions hearing for 14 days from today. At that time, I expect Mr. Rourke and the plaintiffs to show cause as to why they should not be held liable for the attorney fees of the estate, and why this court should not issue a formal finding of bad faith. Rourke stood up, his suit jacket looking suddenly too large for him. Your Honor, regarding the sanctions, save it for the hearing. Mr. Rourke, the judge cut him off, and I want to make one thing perfectly clear to your clients. Judge Holloway leaned forward, locking eyes with Marlowe. The filing of this motion, combined with the evidence of the midnight notary visit, has likely already triggered the no contest clause of the Arthur Sterling Trust. You are currently walking a very thin wire over a very deep pit. If you take one more step, if you file one more frivolous motion, if you make one more attempt to circumvent the trust, I will not wait for the final hearing. I will issue a summary judgment declaring your interest in this estate forfeited. Do you understand? Marlowe did not answer verbally. She gave a single, stiff nod. It was mechanical. It was the movement of a machine that had stripped its gears but was still trying to turn. Elias Thorne stood up. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a man checking off items on a grocery list. Your Honor, Thorne said, given the behavior of the plaintiffs, specifically the admitted attempt to access the decedent's home and the coercion regarding the deed, Iron Gate is requesting an immediate protective order. We ask that the court enjoin Dean Bainbridge, Cynthia Bainbridge, and Marlowe Bainbridge from contacting any financial institution, custodian, or property manager associated with the Sterling estate. The judge did not even look at the defense table for an objection. Granted, Judge Holloway said, signing the order in front of him with a sharp scratch of his pen. The clerk will file it immediately. If they so much as call the bank to check a balance, Mr. Thorne, you let me know. I will hold them in contempt faster than they can hang up the phone. It was a rout. It was a total dismantling of their power. For 30 years, I had watched my family use money and influence to bully their way through life. They treated rules like suggestions and laws like inconveniences. Now, for the first time, they were hitting a wall that would not move. The judge began to gather his papers. The bailiff stepped forward to announce the adjournment. The tension in my chest began to loosen. Just a fraction. I thought it was over. I thought we had won the day. But then, the side door near the judge's chambers opened. A court clerk slipped in. She did not walk with the usual casual pace of court staff. She moved quickly, her heels clicking on the floor in a rapid staccato. She went straight to the judge and whispered something in his ear. Judge Holloway stopped stacking his files. He froze. His face changed. The anger that had been there moments ago vanished, replaced by a look of grave seriousness. He nodded once to the clerk, then, slowly, he turned his head and looked directly at my father. It was not the look of a judge looking at a litigant. It was the look of a man watching a disaster unfold. Let the record show, the judge said, his voice quiet but amplified by the microphone, that the court is pausing adjournment for a service of process. The The main doors of the courtroom swung open again. This was not a lawyer. This was not a family member. It was a man in a beige uniform with a badge clipped to his belt. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand. He did not look around the room. He walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of law enforcement. He walked past the bar. He walked past me. He walked straight to the row of seats behind the plaintiff's table where my parents were sitting. "Dean Bainbridge?" the officer asked. My father looked up. He looked confused. He looked at Rourke, but Rourke was staring at the officer with wide eyes. "Yes," my father said. His voice was a dry croak. "You are served," the officer said. He thrust the envelope into my father's chest. Dean instinctively grabbed it. The officer turned and walked out without another word. The interaction took less than 10 seconds, but it sucked the air out of the room. My father looked down at the envelope. It was not the standard white envelope of a civil lawsuit. It was yellow. It had red stamping on the front. "Open it, Dean," my mother whispered. Her voice was trembling. "What is it? Is it about the house?" My father's hands were shaking so hard he could barely tear the tab. He ripped the top open. He pulled out the cover sheet. I watched the blood drain from his face. It did not happen gradually. It happened all at once, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. He slumped back against the bench, the papers rattling in his grip. "What is it?" Marlo snapped. Turning around, "Let me see." She snatched the papers from his hand. Her eyes scanned the top line. She froze. "It is not civil," Rourke whispered. Leaning in to look, oh my God. My father looked at the judge. He looked like a man who was drowning. This is a mistake." Dean stammered. "This is crazy." "Forgery? Attempted financial exploitation? This is a mistake." My mother let out a scream. It was short and sharp. She grabbed my father's arm. "They are arresting you?" she cried. "Dean, are they arresting you?" "Not yet," Rourke said. Reading the document, "This is a notification of investigation and a subpoena for records. It is from the district attorney's office." My mother spun around. She looked at me. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hate. "You did this!" she screamed at me. "You ungrateful, spiteful child! You called the police on your own father? You are trying to put him in jail just to keep the money?" I sat there, stunned. I had not called the police. I had not called the district attorney. I had barely spoken to anyone except Elias Thorne for the last 10 days. "She is being targeted because of you," my mother yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You dragged this family into the mud." "Mrs. Bainbridge," Judge Holloway's voice cracked like a whip. "Be quiet." He leaned over the bench. He looked at my mother with eyes that were hard as flint. "Your husband is not being targeted because of your daughter," the judge said. "He is being targeted because of his behavior. The court has a mandatory reporting duty when evidence of a felony is presented." The judge pointed to the letter of instruction that was still sitting on his desk. When I read a letter from a deceased man stating that he was ambushed in his home and forced to sign documents under duress. And when you admit to being there, that is not a family dispute. That is probable cause. I did not call the district attorney. "Mrs. Bainbridge, the facts called them." The judge looked at Dean. "I suggest you get a criminal defense attorney. Mr. Bainbridge. Mr. Rourke handles estates. He is not equipped for where you are going. Court is adjourned." The judge stood up and walked out. He did not look back. The room erupted into chaos. Rourke was on his phone, frantically calling someone. My mother was sobbing, clinging to my father. Dean was staring at the wall, catatonic. But Marlo was not crying. She was not panicking. She stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her jacket. She picked up her bag. She walked over to the railing that separated us. I looked at her. For the first time, I saw the resemblance between her and my father. It was in the eyes, that hollow, desperate entitlement. But where my father was weak, Marlo was sharp. She leaned in close. "You think you won," she said softly. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping over concrete. "You think because the judge read a letter, it is over?" I looked her in the eye. "It is over." Marlo, go home. She smiled. It was a terrible smile. It did not reach her eyes. You have no idea what you just started, she said. You think the trust is the only thing that matters. You think paper protects you. She looked at her phone, then back at me. It is not over, Kara. It is just moving to a place where judges cannot help you. She turned and walked away. She grabbed Rourke by the arm and dragged him toward the exit. Leaving our parents to scramble after them, I stood there, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. It should have felt like a victory. I had the ruling. I had the protective order. My father was facing justice. But Marlo's words lingered in the air like a toxic gas. Ms. Bainbridge. I turned. A man was standing beside Elias Thorne. I had seen him earlier, sitting in the gallery, but I had not registered his presence until now. He was older than Thorne, perhaps in his 50s, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been etched from patience. He wore a gray suit that was expensive but understated. "This is Hugh Calder," Thorne said. "He is the litigator I told you about." I extended my hand. "I am Kara. I know," Hugh said. He shook my hand. His grip was dry and firm. He did not smile. He looked at the door where my family had exited. "We need to leave," Hugh said. His voice was calm. The voice of a man who lived his life in 15-minute increments and billed for every second of his expertise. "Not through the front. The press is already gathering, and your family is going to make a scene on the steps." He gestured toward the side door the clerk had used. "My car is waiting in the secure lot." Hugh said, "We will take you to a hotel. It is not safe for you to go back to your apartment tonight." "Why?" I asked. "The judge gave us the protective order." Hugh looked at me. He had the same look in his eyes that Thorne had, the look of someone who knew that rules were only lines on paper until someone decided to cross them. "Protective orders stop people who care about the law," Hugh said. Thorne's voice dropped. "She's not just loud, Kara. She's connected." Hugh glanced at my phone peeking out of my bag. "Did she ever have your SSN? Your old passwords? Anything she could weaponize?" My stomach tightened. "She's had my information since we were kids." "Then don't assume today ends in court," Hugh said. "People like her don't stop at the courthouse steps. Your sister just threatened you in open court after her father was served with a criminal subpoena. Does she look like someone who cares about the law right now?" I nodded. He was right. We gathered our things. I picked up my bag. I felt heavy, exhausted. I just wanted to sleep. I wanted to wake up and find out that this was all a nightmare, and I was back in my cubicle at Redwood Meridian Compliance, auditing spreadsheets for safety violations. We walked to the side door. The hallway beyond was cool and quiet, lined with beige tiles. Our footsteps echoed. Thorne walked on my left. Hugh walked on my right. It felt like an extraction. We reached the heavy steel door that led to the parking lot. Hugh reached out to push the crash bar. Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence. It was a vibration, a low, insistent buzz from Hugh's pocket. He stopped. He did not open the door. He pulled his phone out. He looked at the screen. The color did not drain from his face, but his expression tightened. His eyes narrowed into slits. "What is it?" Thorne asked. Hugh held up the phone. The screen was glowing with a red notification box. "Security alert," Hugh read. "Unauthorized access attempt flagged. Iron Gate custody systems. High-risk escalation. Biometric verification bypass attempt." He looked at Thorne. "A biometric bypass attempt?" Thorne said, sharply. "That shouldn't happen without device-level credentials." Hugh looked at the timestamp on the alert. 0 minutes ago. Hugh said. He looked at me. "Where is your phone?" "Kara?" Hugh asked. "In my bag." I said, "Get it," he ordered. "Do not turn it on. Just look at it." I pulled my phone out. The screen was black. I pressed the side button. Nothing happened. "It is dead." I said, "That is weird. It had 80% charge when we went into court." Hugh nodded grimly. He put his own phone back in his pocket. "She is not waiting." Hugh said. "What do you mean?" I asked. My heart started to hammer against my ribs again. "Marlowe," Hugh said. He looked at the steel door as if he could see through it, out to the parking lot, out to the city beyond. When she slammed her phone on the table, she was not just angry, he said. She wasn't just slamming the phone, Hugh said. She was triggering something, an automated attempt, a call to a broker, a password reset, a move. He grabbed my arm. "We are not going to the hotel. We are going to the Iron Gate secure facility." "Why?" I asked. "What is she doing?" Hugh looked at me, and his voice was cold enough to freeze the blood in my veins. "She is not trying to contest the will anymore. Kara," he said, "she is trying to become you." He held up his phone again. Another alert flashed. Attempted access blocked. Identity verification pending. "She is doing it right now," Hugh said. "She is hitting the accounts. She is hitting the custodians. She is using the data she has on you to simulate your identity." "But how?" I whispered. "Because she knows everything about you." Hugh said, "And what she does not know, she is buying." He pushed the door open. The bright sunlight hit us, but it did not feel warm. It felt like a spotlight. "Run," Hugh said, and for the first time in my life, I ran. Not from a bully on a playground, but from a sister who had decided that if she could not inherit my grandfather's life, she would simply steal mine. The interior of the black SUV smelled of new leather and aggressive air conditioning. The city outside the tinted windows was a blur of gray concrete and dull sky. But inside the vehicle, the world had shrunk to the glowing screen of Hugh Calder's phone. He had placed it on the center console, engaging the speakerphone with a sharp tap of his index finger. We were moving, but the real velocity was happening invisibly. In the data streams that connected the courthouse to the financial fortress of Iron Gate. "Report," Hugh said. He did not say hello. He did not introduce himself. He spoke with the economy of a man who knew that every wasted second cost dollars. The voice that answered filled the cabin. It was calm, synthetic, and utterly devoid of panic. It reminded me of the automated warnings in an airplane cockpit just before a crash. Authentication failure detected at 14 hours and 32 minutes. The voice said, "Subject attempted to access the primary beneficiary portal using the correct username and password. Multi-factor authentication challenge was issued." "And?" Hugh asked. "The challenge failed." The voice continued. "The subject entered an incorrect 6-digit code." 3 seconds later, the system received a request to bypass the 2-factor protocol. I stared at the phone. My stomach felt like it was filled with ice water. They had my password. How did they have my password? I used a variation of my first pet's name and my birth year, a habit I knew was weak, but never thought would be weaponized by my own sister. What was the justification for the bypass? Elias Thorne asked from the front passenger seat. The voice replied instantly. The user claimed a lost device. They initiated a recovery sequence. Immediately following the failed login, we received 3 simultaneous ticket submissions. 1. A request to update the primary contact phone number. 2. A request to change the email of record to C. Bainbridge. Recovery Proton Mail. Com. 3. A request to update the physical mailing address to a post office box in Providence. My breath caught in my throat. They are not just trying to log in. I whispered, "They are trying to become me." Hugh looked at me, his eyes hard. "They are trying to execute a hostile account takeover," he corrected. "If they change the email and the phone number, they cut you out of the loop. They can reset the password, approve their own transfers, and drain the liquidity before we even get back to the office. Trace the origin." Hugh commanded the phone. "Cross-referencing now," the voice said. "The IP address resolves to a mobile gateway on the Verizon network. Geolocation places the device within a 50-meter radius of the Bristol County Probate Court. Device fingerprint matches a known endpoint. An iPhone 15 Pro Max registered to a corporate account held by Bainbridge Associates. It was Marlowe. Of course it was Marlowe. The timing aligns perfectly with her exit from the courtroom," Thorne noted. She walked out. And 90 seconds later, she launched the attack. "Block it," Hugh said. "Burn it down. We have initiated a level 5 fraud hold," the voice assured him. "All digital access to the Arthur Sterling Trust is suspended. No changes to contact information can be made without in-person verification using biometric data and government-issued identification at our Boston headquarters. The account is frozen." "Good," Hugh said. "Package the logs. I want the timestamps, the geolocation data, the device ID, and the specific nature of the change requests. Send it to my secure server as a certified forensic report." "Done," the voice said. Hugh ended the call. The silence that rushed back into the car was heavy. I looked out the window. We were passing a strip mall. Normal people going about their normal lives, buying groceries and getting haircuts. They had no idea that a few miles away, a digital war was being fought over the legacy of a dead man. "She is insane," I said. "She just got a court order telling her to stop. The judge literally told her she would lose everything if she tried to circumvent the trust. Why would she do this? Why would she leave the courtroom and immediately commit a felony?" Hugh was already typing on his laptop, which he had balanced on his knees. "Because she thinks she is faster than the law," Hugh said without looking up, "and because she is desperate. You heard what she said. He owed us. People who believe they are owed something do not see theft as theft. They see it as collection." He hit a key with a loud clack. "I am filing the security report directly into the sanctions docket," Hugh said. "I am not even going to write a motion. I am just going to upload the raw data. The judge will see the timestamp. 14:32. That is exactly 4 minutes after he issued the protective order." He looked at me. "This is not a warning shot. Kara, this is the kill shot for her inheritance. When Judge Holloway sees that she tried to hijack your identity to access the funds moments after he told her to freeze, he will enforce the no contest clause. She just spent $12 million to try to steal a few thousand." I closed my eyes. I could see the moment again. Marlo standing at the table, the way she had typed on her phone, the way she had slammed it face down. "I thought she was just angry," I said softly. "I thought she was throwing a tantrum because she lost." "It was not a tantrum," Thorne said from the front seat. He turned to look at me. It was an execution command. She had the inputs ready. She probably had the new email address set up days ago. She was just waiting for the signal that the legal route had failed. I shivered. The cold calculation of it was terrifying. It meant that while we were arguing about affidavits and medical records, she had been building a shadow infrastructure to rob me. The car slowed down as we approached a nondescript office building made of gray glass and steel. It looked like 1,000 other buildings. Anonymous and boring. "We are here," Thorne said. "This is the Iron Gate Satellite Processing Center. We need to get you inside and verified." We pulled into an underground garage. The heavy gate rattled shut behind us, cutting off the daylight. As we walked toward the elevator, Thorne's phone buzzed. He stopped. He looked at the screen, and for the first time since I had met him, his expression showed a flicker of genuine surprise. "Hugh," Thorne said. "Hold on." Hugh stopped, his hand hovering over the elevator call button. "What is it?" "The risk manager just sent an addendum to the report," Thorne said. He tapped his screen, expanding the text. When they ran the device fingerprint analysis on Marlowe's phone, they found a correlation. "A correlation to what?" Hugh asked. "To a previous inquiry," Thorne said. He looked at me. 6 weeks ago," Thorne said. 2 weeks before your grandfather died. We received an inquiry through a third-party data broker. Someone was trying to verify the existence of the trust. They did not have the account number, but they had Arthur Sterling's social security number and the property address." I frowned. "But Marlo said she didn't know about the trust until today. She acted shocked in the courtroom." Thorne nodded. "She acted shocked. But the device that pinged our system today is the same device that accessed the data broker's portal 6 weeks ago." Hugh let out a low whistle. "So she knew." Hugh said, "She knew the trust existed before he died, and she knew she was not the trustee." Thorne added, "That is why she was so aggressive about the will. She knew the only way to beat the trust was to get the assets out of it before we took control, or to pretend it never existed. This changes everything," Hugh said. He ran a hand through his silver hair. "This is not just a reaction to the hearing. This is a premeditated conspiracy. They have been planning this siege since he was on his deathbed." I felt sick. I leaned against the concrete wall of the parking garage. The exhaust fumes were making me dizzy. They knew. I whispered, all that time, when they were pretending to care, when they were bringing him soup, when they were asking me how he was doing. They were just scouting the perimeter. They were checking the locks. Thorne stepped closer to me. "Ms. Bainbridge," he said gently, "I know this is painful, but this information is a weapon. It proves malice. It proves intent. They cannot claim ignorance anymore." He held up his badge to the card reader on the wall. The elevator doors slid open. We went up to the 12th floor. The office was quiet, filled with the hum of servers and the soft typing of analysts. Thorne led us to a conference room with a view of the harbor. The water looked gray and choppy, matching my mood. "Sit down," Thorne said. "I have something for you." He walked to a wall of secure lockers. He punched in a code, scanned his thumbprint, and pulled out a metal box. It was a standard fireproof document box, the kind you buy at an office supply store, but it was sealed with heavy-duty, tamper-evident tape. "Your grandfather gave this to us on the day he signed the trust," Thorne said. Placing the box on the table, he told us to keep it in the vault. He said, "If they sue, give this to Kara. If they do not sue, burn it." I stared at the box. It was dented in the corner. It looked old. He knew. I said, "He knew they would sue." Thorne handed me a pair of scissors. I cut the tape. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I lifted the lid. Inside, the box was mostly empty. There were no stacks of cash. There were no diamonds. There was just a single folder lying at the bottom. It was red, the color of a warning sign. On the front cover, written in black marker in my grandfather's shaky block letters, were 4 words: "If they sue." My hands trembled as I reached for it. The cardboard felt rough under my fingertips. I looked at Hugh. He nodded encouragingly. I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was not a legal document. It was a photograph. It was old, grainy, taken maybe 30 years ago. It showed my father, young and handsome, standing next to a man I did not recognize. They were shaking hands in front of a construction site. Beneath the photo was a printed email. It was dated 5 years ago. It was from an anonymous address, sent to my grandfather. I read the subject line, "The loan." I read the first line of the email. "Arthur, if you do not pay the interest on Dean's bridge loan by Friday, we are going to exercise the lien on the warehouse, and we are going to tell the partners where the collateral actually came from." I frowned. I did not understand. What bridge loan? What warehouse? I turned the page. There was a spreadsheet. It was titled, "Unauthorized Withdrawals, 2018 to 2023. I ran my finger down the columns. The numbers were staggering. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, 20,000, all drawn from a corporate account that my grandfather had supposedly closed years ago. And then I saw the notes in the margin. My grandfather's handwriting. "Dean says he needs it for the girls' tuition." Lied. Checked with school. Tuition paid by trust. "Marlo says she needs it for a condo down payment." Lied. Condo is a rental. "Cynthia says they are behind on taxes." Lied. "Assessor says taxes paid." I felt a wave of nausea. They had been bleeding him dry. For years, they had been lying to him, stealing from him, using me and my education as an excuse to siphon money out of his accounts. But that was not the worst part. At the back of the folder, there was a document that made my blood run cold. It was a photocopy of a life insurance policy. A massive one, $5 million. The beneficiary was not the trust. It was not me. It was the Bainbridge Family Revocable Trust. And the date on the policy application was 6 months ago. The same week my grandfather started getting really sick. I looked closely at the signature at the bottom of the application. It said Arthur P. Sterling, but it was not his signature. I knew my grandfather's signature. It was spiky, angular, full of sharp edges. The signature was round. It was smooth. It looked like someone had practiced it. but they had practiced it from memory, not from a model. I looked at Hugh. I pushed the paper across the table. Look at the date, I said. Hugh looked. He stiffened. Look at the signature, I said. Hugh pulled a magnifying glass from his pocket. He actually carried one, and leaned over the paper. He studied the ink flow. He studied the loops. He looked up. His face was grim. This is a forgery, Hugh said. A bad one. He looked at the rest of the documents in the folder. The emails, the spreadsheet, the photo. They were not just trying to steal the estate, Hugh said, his voice low. They were trying to cover their tracks. They took out a policy on him without his knowledge, hoping the payout would cover the holes they dug in his accounts before anyone noticed. He looked at me. Kara, this is not a civil case anymore. This is a RICO case. This is organized fraud. I looked down at the red folder. If they sue, my grandfather had known. He had gathered the evidence. He had tracked every lie, every stolen dollar. He had built this dossier not to put them in jail, but to hold over them, to keep them in check. He had tried to protect them from themselves until the very end, but they had sued. They had broken the one rule he gave them. I closed the folder. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard clarity of the truth. Thorne was watching me. What do you want to do? Thorne asked. I ran my hand over the red cardboard. Block the accounts. I said, lock them out of everything, and then send this folder to the district attorney. But your father, Hugh said gently, if we send this, he is not just looking at fines. He is looking at federal prison. I looked at the photo of my father shaking hands with the stranger. I looked at the spreadsheet of lies. I thought about the night they brought the notary to his deathbed. He made his choice. I said, I pushed the folder toward Hugh. File it, I said. The room was silent. Outside, the gray ocean churned. Inside, the machine of justice began to turn. Fed by the fuel my grandfather had left behind, ready to crush the people who had mistaken his kindness for weakness. The fluorescent lights of the conference room hummed with a low, electric buzz that felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. The red folder lay open on the mahogany table, looking less like a collection of papers and more like an autopsy report of my family's morality. I reached for the next document in the stack. It was a printout of an email chain, stapled to a crumpled, half-torn sheet of paper that had been taped back together. My grandfather had been a man of meticulous order. He did not tear papers by accident. If he had torn this, he had done it in a rage. I smoothed the paper out. It was a loan application. Specifically, it was an application for a home equity line of credit, secured against my grandfather's primary residence in Bristol. The amount requested was $500,000, but the applicant was not Arthur Sterling. The applicant was an entity called Harbor View Management, LLC. I looked at the address listed for the LLC. It was a post office box in Newport. I recognized it immediately. It was the same post office box my parents used for their vacation rental bills. The one they thought I did not know about because they claimed the rental property paid for itself. I looked at the date on the application. November 12th. The breath hissed out of my lungs. November 12th. The night of the mobile notary. The night they had ambushed him while I was at the pharmacy. They were not just trying to get him to sign a power of attorney. I whispered, they were trying to leverage the house. They were trying to strip the equity out of the property before he even died. Hugh Calder leaned over. Adjusting his glasses, he pointed to the bottom of the page. Look at the signature. Hugh said. I looked. It read, Arthur P. Sterling. At first glance, it looked genuine. It had the same slant, the same loop on the S. But there was something wrong with it. It looked too deliberate. It lacked the fluid, muscle memory speed of a man signing his name for the 10,000th time. It is shaky. I said, but Grandpa was shaky. He had tremors. That is not a tremor, Hugh said, pulling out his magnifying glass again. Look at the starts and stops. He hovered the glass over the ink. When a person with a tremor signs, the line is jagged but continuous. Hugh explained, his voice clinical. The pen stays on the paper. But look here, and here. There are micro-lift marks, tiny dots where the pen was lifted and then placed back down. This is not a tremor. This is hesitation. This is someone drawing a signature, not writing one. He picked up another piece of paper from the folder. It was a sheet of scrap paper, the kind my grandfather kept by the landline to write down phone numbers. On it, there were a dozen attempts at the signature Arthur P. Sterling. Some were crossed out, some were half-finished, and right in the middle of the page, in my sister's distinctive, sharp handwriting, was a list of dates and amounts. November 12th, notary confirms. November 15th, funds disperse. November 16th, transfer to offshore. I felt a cold sensation wash over me. A second wave of betrayal that hit harder than the first. The first betrayal had been about greed. This was about erasure. They had sat at his kitchen table, practicing his signature while he slept in the next room, planning to turn his life's work into a wire transfer to an offshore account. They were going to leave him with nothing. I said, if this loan had gone through, and they took the money, Irongate would have foreclosed on the house when he died. Thorne finished. The estate would be insolvent. Hugh pulled out his phone. He did not look shocked. He looked like a hunter who had just found fresh tracks. I am sending a scan of this to our forensic document examiner, Hugh said. I need a formal affidavit stating that this is a simulation forgery. I want the report ready for the sanctions hearing. He tapped the screen, snapping high-resolution photos of the torn application and the practice sheet. While he worked, Elias Thorne walked over to the window. He stood with his back to us, looking out at the gray harbor. You know, Ms. Bainbridge, Thorne said. There is a clause in the trust that I did not mention earlier. It is standard in high-value estates, but we rarely have to invoke it. What clause? I asked. Section 12. Paragraph 8, Thorne said, turning around. The forensic audit clause. He walked back to the table and tapped the thick trust binder. It states that in the event of a contest or a challenge to the validity of the trust, the trustee, that is Irongate, is granted the automatic authority to conduct a full forensic audit of all financial interactions between the contesting beneficiaries and the grantor for a period of 5 years prior to death. He looked at me with a grim expression. Basically, Thorne continued, by filing that lawsuit, your sister did not just risk her future inheritance, she gave us a warrant to investigate her past. She gave us permission to look at every check, every transfer, every loan, and every gift she or your parents ever received from Arthur Sterling. I looked at the red folder. My grandfather had already done the work. He had the spreadsheet. He had the emails. So we verify it. I said, we take this folder, and we use the audit clause to prove it against the bank records. Exactly, Thorne said. Marlowe thought she was applying pressure. She thought she was putting the trust under a microscope. But what she actually did was turn on a massive spotlight and point it directly at her own financial history. She invited the FBI into her living room. My phone buzzed on the table. I stared at it. It was a text message. Mom. I felt a spike of adrenaline. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Don't answer it, Hugh said without looking up from his work. I looked at the preview on the screen. Kara, honey, please, Dad is having chest pains. We are so worried. I know we have had our differences, but family comes first. Please just call us. We miss you. It was perfect. It was the exact script of a concerned mother. 10 years ago, that text would have made me drop everything and run to them. 5 years ago, it would have made me call. But today, looking at the forged loan application, all I saw was bait. They are fishing. I said, they want a reaction. Hugh agreed. They want you to say something angry. They want you to say something incriminating. Or they just want to know where you are. If you reply, they can ping the location data. I did not reply. I pressed the power button and turned the screen black. I was done being the daughter who came running. I was done being the emotional jagged edge that they smoothed over with guilt. Hugh stood up. He began pacing the small room, his mind organizing the battlefield. We are not going to scream at them in court. Hugh said, we are not going to get emotional. That is what they want. They want a family fight. They want a soap opera because in a soap opera, the truth gets muddy. He stopped and pointed at the red folder. We are going to be boring, Hugh said. We are going to be deadly boring. We are going to present the timeline. November 12th, the practice sheet. November 12th, the mobile notary. November 12th, the loan application. We are going to show the judge that this was not a dispute about capacity. This was a sophisticated, multi-party conspiracy to commit bank fraud. He looked at me. We build a pattern. Kara, judges hate being lied to, but they hate being used even more. Your sister tried to use the probate court as the getaway driver for her robbery. When Judge Holloway sees that, he will not just sanction them, he will destroy them. Thorne cleared his throat. There is one more thing, Thorne said. He walked over to the metal box. He reached into the very back, behind where the folder had been. He pulled out a small, silver USB drive. Your grandfather was very specific about this, Thorne said. He said the red folder was for the defense, but this was for the kill shot. He held the drive up to the light. He gave me strict instructions. Thorne said, this drive is to remain sealed until the sanctions hearing. It is only to be played if the family persists in their lies after the letter of instruction is read. What is it? I asked. Is it a video? Thorne shook his head. Audio, he said. He recorded it on his dictaphone the morning after the notary came. He said he wanted to leave a statement that could not be forged. He said he wanted the judge to hear his voice, not just read his words. I stared at the small silver stick. It contained the voice of a dead man. It contained the final testimony of the grandfather who had taught me how to fish and how to be honest. Marlo thinks she is fighting a piece of paper. I said softly, she does not know he is still in the room. Hugh took the drive from Thorne and placed it in an evidence bag. He sealed it with a sharp zip. We save it, Hugh said. We let them lie. We let Rourke dig the hole deeper. We let them deny the forgery. We let them claim the letter was a fake. And then, when they have sworn under oath that they never pressured him, we hit play. I finished. Thorne nodded. Get some rest. Ms. Bainbridge, Thorne said, you are going to need it. The next 48 hours are going to be the longest of your life. But remember one thing. He tapped the red folder. You are not the defendant anymore. You are the prosecutor. The silence in the Iron Gate secure facility was a physical weight, broken only by the hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic tapping of Hugh Calder's fingers on his laptop keyboard. We had been in the bunker for 24 hours, analyzing the documents from the red folder, preparing the weapon that would dismantle my family's narrative. But while we worked in silence, the enemy was noisy. It started with an email. It arrived in my inbox at 9 a.m, bypassing the spam filters because it came from a personal address I had not blocked yet. The subject line was 3 words, moving forward. I clicked it open. It was from Marlo. Kara. The email read, I think we have let this get out of hand. The lawyers are the only ones winning here. Dad is a mess. Mom is sick with worry. I am willing to put the past behind us. Let's settle this like family. We split the estate 50-50. You get half, I get half. We dissolve the trust, and we walk away. No more courts, no more investigations. Just us. Let me know by noon. I stared at the screen. For a second, a split second. The old Kara, the peacemaker, the sister who just wanted Thanksgiving dinner to be quiet, felt a tug. It sounded reasonable. Half was still $6 million. It was more money than I would ever spend. It would end the war. I turned the screen toward Hugh. She wants to settle, I said. 50-50. Hugh did not even look up from his document. It is a trap, he said. He finally spun his chair around and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Think about it, Kara. The trust is irrevocable. It is a legal fortress. The only way to dissolve it is if all beneficiaries agree that the trust is invalid or defective. So? I asked. So, Hugh continued, his voice sharp. If you agree to a settlement, you are legally admitting that the trust is flawed. You are validating her claim that your grandfather was incompetent. You are rewriting his will. He pointed a pen at me. And the moment you sign a settlement agreement that contradicts the terms of the no contest clause, you effectively join her in contesting the trust. You trigger your own forfeiture. She gets you to sign. She shows the judge you agreed the trust was bad. The trust dissolves. And then she pulls out the prior will, the one that leaves everything to her. I felt a cold chill slide down my spine. She creates a new contract, Elias Thorne added from the corner of the room, one that supersedes the trust. And since she is the executor of the old will, once the trust is gone, she controls the chessboard again. It is not an olive branch. Ms. Bainbridge, it is a suicide pact where only you die. I looked back at the email. Just us. It was a lie. It was never just us. It was her and the money. Don't reply. Hugh said, let the deadline pass. Silence is the loudest answer you can give. But silence, it turned out, was not something my family could handle. At 10:30, my phone buzzed. It was a number I did not recognize, likely a burner or a friend's phone. Because I had blocked my parents' numbers, I answered it, putting it on speaker. Kara? It was my father. His voice sounded thin, raspy, as if he had aged 10 years in 2 days. Kara, please don't hang up, he wheezed. I am at the hospital. My heart jumped. For all their cruelty, he was still my father. What happened? I asked, my voice betraying a flicker of concern. It is your mother, Dean said. She collapsed. Her blood pressure spiked. The doctors are saying it is stress-induced. Acute cardiac stress. He paused, letting the beeping of a machine in the background filter through the line. It sounded authentic. She is calling for you. Kara, he said, his voice breaking. You are killing her. This lawsuit. This investigation. Her heart cannot take it. If you have any humanity left, you will stop this. You will tell the lawyers to back off. Do you want to bury your mother next to your grandfather? I looked at Hugh. He was shaking his head slowly. He typed something on his screen and turned it to me. Weaponized fragility. I took a deep breath. I remembered the spreadsheet. Cynthia says they are behind on taxes. Lied. I remembered the mobile notary. I remembered them practicing my grandfather's signature while he lay dying. If she is in the hospital. Dad, I said, keeping my voice steady. Then she is in the best place she can be. The doctors will take care of her. Kara, he shouted, the weak facade slipping for a moment into anger. This is your fault. You are destroying this family. No. Dad, I said, I am just reading the receipt. I hung up. My hand was shaking, but not from guilt. It was shaking from the adrenaline of finally realizing that their love was conditional on my submission. By noon, when the deadline for Marlowe's settlement offer passed without a response, the war shifted fronts. Marlowe took to Instagram. She did not name me. She was too smart for that, but she posted a black and white photo of herself holding my grandfather's hand, a photo taken years ago, staged for a holiday card. The caption was a masterpiece of passive aggression, heartbroken to see my grandfather's legacy twisted by greed. He wanted peace for his family, not lawsuits. It is sad how money changes people, how it makes them forget who raised them. I will keep fighting for the truth, even if I have to fight alone against those who want to erase his real wishes. Family first, justice. For Arthur. The comments were already rolling in. Stay strong. March, so sorry you are going through this. Some people are just toxic. She is trying to win the court of public opinion. I said, showing the post to Thorne. She wants to paint me as the villain so she doesn't look like a loser when the verdict comes down. Hugh looked at the post. He frowned. She is walking a fine line, Hugh said. He pulled up the protective order Judge Holloway had signed. The order prohibits harassment and any actions intended to intimidate or coerce the other party. Hugh noted, publicly defaming you to pressure you into a settlement? That is coercion. He opened his email client. I am sending a screenshot of this to Gavin Rourke. Hugh said, I am not going to ask him to take it down. I am just going to tell him that we are adding it to Exhibit C for the sanctions hearing. Every like she gets is another nail in the coffin of her credibility. An hour later, the post was deleted. But the damage to Marlowe's confidence was just beginning. At 2 in the afternoon, the phone at the Iron Gate desk rang. It was the internal line. "Mr. Calder," the receptionist said, "there is a Miss Brenda Sterling on the line for you. She says it is an emergency. She says she is afraid of going to jail." Brenda, my cousin, the one who had stood on the witness stand and mumbled about me isolating my grandfather. "Put her through," Hugh said. He put it on speaker. "Mr. Calder?" Brenda's voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysterical. Is Kara there?" "I am here, Brenda," I said. "Oh God, Kara, I am so sorry." Brenda blubbered. I didn't know it was serious. Marlowe told me it was just a formality. She said if I helped, she would pay off my credit card debt. Slow down. "Ms. Sterling," Hugh commanded. "What exactly did Marlowe tell you?" "She gave me a script," Brenda cried. "We met at Starbucks the morning before court. She wrote it down on a napkin. She told me to say you kept us out. She told me to say Arthur was confused." "And was he confused?" Hugh asked. "No," Brenda sobbed. "Uncle Artie was sharp as a tack. I talked to him at Christmas. He asked me about my cat. He was fine. I lied. I lied to the judge." "Why are you telling us this now?" I asked. "Because I got a letter," Brenda said, "from the court. It says I am a person of interest in a perjury investigation. Kara, I can't go to jail. I have kids. Please, if I recant, if I tell the truth, will they let me go?" Hugh looked at me. This was it. The wall of silence was crumbling. "Brenda," Hugh said, his voice calm and professional, "I cannot promise you immunity, but I can tell you this. If you come to my office tomorrow and sign a sworn affidavit stating exactly what Marlowe told you to do, and if you provide the text messages or any proof of that meeting, I will present it to the judge as cooperation. It will look a lot better than if he drags it out of you on the stand." "I will do it," Brenda said instantly. "I will be there at 9. I still have the napkin. I kept it because, I don't know, I was scared." "You kept the napkin?" Hugh asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Brenda said. "It has her handwriting on it." Hugh smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Bring the napkin." "Brenda." By 4 o'clock, the atmosphere in the enemy camp had clearly disintegrated into panic. Gavin Rourke called. When Hugh answered, Rourke did not sound like the slick, confident lawyer who had slapped the file on the table 3 weeks ago. He sounded like a man who had realized he was standing in a room full of gas and was holding a lit match. "Hugh, look," Rourke began, skipping the pleasantries. "Can we talk off the record?" "Go ahead." Hugh said, "My client is volatile." Rourke said, "We are looking to de-escalate. If we withdraw the motion for immediate transfer, and if we withdraw the contest to the trust, will Irongate agree to drop the sanctions motion?" Hugh laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Gavin," Hugh said, "you are asking me to put the toothpaste back in the tube after you set the bathroom on fire. Come on." "Hugh," Rourke pleaded, "it is a family dispute. Nobody wants to see Dean Bainbridge in handcuffs. Let's just walk away. The trust stands. Kara wins. We go home." Hugh looked at the timeline on the whiteboard, the forged signature, the mobile notary, the fake loan application. "It is too late for that." "Gavin," Hugh said. "Why?" Rourke asked. "Because you cannot withdraw a timestamp," Hugh said. "Your client tried to hack the trust account 4 minutes after the judge issued a protective order. That is not a civil dispute. That is criminal contempt and attempted grand larceny. And frankly, Gavin, with the evidence we have of the forgery, you should be less worried about your client and more worried about your own license. Did you know about the mobile notary?" There was a long silence on the other end. I was told it was a wellness check." Rourke stammered. "You were told?" Hugh repeated, "Well, I suggest you look at the discovery we just uploaded to the server. Because Brenda Sterling is coming in tomorrow to testify that your client suborned perjury, the line went dead. Rourke hung up. At 5:30. The notification from the court arrived. It was a procedural update from Judge Holloway's clerk. Notice of hearing scope expansion. The sanctions hearing scheduled for next week is hereby expanded to include an inquiry into abuse of process, perjury, and subornation of perjury. The court requests the personal appearance of all named plaintiffs and their counsel. Failure to appear will result in the issuance of bench warrants. It was the judicial equivalent of locking the doors. The judge was not just going to dismiss the case, he was going to dissect it. I sat back in my chair, exhausted. "They are done," I said. "Not yet," Thorne said. He was looking at his phone. "There is one last domino." "What?" I asked. "Marlowe," he said. At that exact moment, across town in a luxury condo that she could not actually afford, Marlowe Bainbridge was hearing the doorbell ring. She opened the door to find a bike messenger. He handed her a thick envelope. It was not from the court. It was not from Irongate. It was from Rourke Sterling, LLP, her own law firm. She tore it open. "Dear Ms. Bainbridge, due to the emergence of conflicting evidence regarding the provenance of the documents provided to this firm, and in light of potential ethical violations concerning witness testimony, we are hereby providing notice of our intent to withdraw as counsel of record. We advise you to seek independent criminal counsel immediately." She dropped the letter. She stood alone in her hallway. Her lawyer had quit. Her cousin had flipped. Her parents were facing indictment. And the sister she had bullied for 30 years was sitting in a secure room with a red folder that held the story of every sin she had ever committed. She reached for her phone to call her father, but stopped. For the first time in her life, Marlowe Bainbridge realized that there was no one left to call. She had spent her life buying people, and now, her credit was declined. I looked at the silver USB drive on the table, the final piece of evidence my grandfather had left. "They are going to come into that hearing alone," I said, "and they are going to lie, because it is the only thing they know how to do. And when they do," Hugh said, picking up the drive, "we will let Arthur answer them." The courtroom had changed. It no longer felt like a place where families came to resolve disputes. It felt like an operating theater where a body was being dissected, and the patient on the table was the reputation of the Bainbridge family. There were no more theatrics. My mother, Cynthia, was not crying into her handkerchief. She was sitting frozen, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. My father, Dean, was slumped in his chair, staring at the floor, the yellow envelope of the criminal subpoena still resting on the table in front of him like a radioactive isotope, and Marlowe. Marlowe sat perfectly straight, her face a mask of porcelain indifference, though I could see the pulse jumping frantically in the hollow of her throat. Judge Holloway entered the room. He did not greet anyone. He did not look at the docket. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and looked directly at Gavin Rourke. "This is a sanctions hearing," Judge Holloway said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the terrifying weight of absolute authority. "We are here to determine if the plaintiffs filed their initial motion in bad faith. We are here to determine if there has been an abuse of the judicial process. And we are here to determine if I need to refer this entire bench to the district attorney for perjury charges." Rourke stood up. He looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days. His tie was slightly crooked. "Your Honor," Rourke began, his voice shaking, "we would like to—" "Sit down, Mr. Rourke," the judge cut him off. "You will speak when I ask you to speak. Right now. I want the record to be established." The judge pointed to the defense table. "Mr. Thorne, you filed a security report with the court yesterday. Please summarize it for the record." Elias Thorne stood up. He did not look at Marlowe. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor," Thorne said, his voice crisp and clinical, "at 14 hours and 32 minutes on the day of the last hearing, exactly 4 minutes after this court issued a protective order, the digital security perimeter of the Arthur Sterling Trust was breached." He held up a chart. It was a timeline, magnified and mounted on a board. This chart represents the login attempts. The user successfully entered the username and password for the primary beneficiary account. When prompted for multi-factor authentication, the user failed. Immediately following that failure, the user submitted 3 account recovery requests. Thorne pointed to the red line on the chart. They attempted to change the registered email address. They attempted to change the phone number. And they attempted to change the physical mailing address to a post office box in Newport. And can you identify the source of these requests? The judge asked. We can. Thorne replied. The IP address and device fingerprint confirmed that the requests originated from an iPhone 15 Pro Max registered to the law firm of Rourke and Sterling, specifically assigned to the user Marlo Bainbridge. The room went deadly silent. I looked at Marlo. She did not blink. She did not move. She was staring straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the digital footprint she had left behind. The location data places the device within 50 meters of this courthouse at the exact moment the requests were made. Thorne added. Judge Holloway turned his gaze to Rourke. Mr. Rourke, the judge said, your client attempted to hijack the trust account and divert assets 4 minutes after I ordered her not to touch them. Do you have an explanation? Rourke stood up slowly. He wiped sweat from his forehead. Your Honor, Rourke stammered. My client. She was confused. She believed that as the executor of the will, she had a duty to secure the assets. She was trying to protect the account from hacking. The judge stared at him. She was trying to protect the account from hacking by changing the email address to her own private account and routing the mail to a secret post office box? It was a misunderstanding of the court's order, Rourke said weakly. A misunderstanding, the judge repeated. He picked up a file from his desk. Mr. Calder, the judge said to Hugh, you submitted an addendum to this report regarding a loan application. Yes, Your Honor, Hugh said. Standing up? He walked to the center of the room. He held the red folder. This goes to the heart of the misunderstanding, Hugh said. We have uncovered evidence that this was not an isolated incident. This was part of a pattern of financial predation that began 6 months ago. Hugh placed the torn loan application on the evidence projector. The image appeared on the screens mounted on the walls. This is an application for a $500,000 home equity line of credit, Hugh explained. It is dated November 12th. The applicant is a shell company, Harbor View Management, controlled by Dean and Marlo Bainbridge. The collateral listed is Arthur Sterling's home. Hugh pointed to the signature at the bottom. And this is the signature of Arthur Sterling. Or rather, it is a simulation of his signature. Hugh switched the slide. The screen now showed the practice sheet, the page covered in my grandfather's shaky attempts and Marlo's crisp handwriting listing the dates. We have a forensic document examiner's report, Hugh said, handing a thick document to the clerk. It confirms that the signature on the loan application was forged. It identifies the handwriting on the practice sheet as belonging to Marlo Bainbridge. And most damning of all, the date of this application, November 12th, coincides exactly with the night the plaintiffs admitted to bringing a mobile notary to the decedent's home. Hugh turned to face the family. They were not there to check on his health. Your Honor, they were there to force him to sign this loan. When he refused, they tried to forge it, and when that failed, they waited for him to die and sued his estate to finish the job. Objection, Rourke yelled. But there was no force in it. This is speculation. It is not speculation, Judge Holloway roared. It is a straight line. The judge slammed his hand on the desk. You come into my courtroom, demand the immediate transfer of $12 million, accuse his granddaughter of elder abuse without a shred of evidence, and now I find out you were running a shell company to strip the equity out of his house while he was on his deathbed? He looked at Rourke with pure disgust. You call that a misunderstanding? Rourke sank back into his chair. He had no answer. The judge looked at the back of the room. Is Brenda Sterling present? The judge asked. My cousin stood up. She looked small, terrified, clutching her purse with both hands. Come forward. Ms. Sterling, the judge ordered. Brenda walked to the witness stand. She did not look at Marlowe. She kept her eyes fixed on the judge. "You submitted an affidavit to Mr. Calder yesterday," the judge said. "Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Brenda whispered. "In it, you state that your testimony at the previous hearing, that Kara Bainbridge isolated her grandfather, was false. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "Why did you lie to this court?" "Ms. Sterling?" Brenda took a shaky breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled white napkin. "Because she told me to," Brenda said, her voice trembling. She pointed a shaking finger at Marlowe. "We met at Starbucks. She wrote it down. She said if I didn't say what she wanted, I wouldn't get anything from the estate. She said she would pay off my debts. She promised she would take care of it." Brenda held up the napkin. "She wrote the words for me." Brenda sobbed. "She told me to use the word isolated. She said it was a legal trigger word." I looked at Marlowe. Her face had gone completely white. It was not the white of innocence. It was the white of a corpse. The blood had left her skin, pooling somewhere deep in her terrified core. She stared at the napkin as if it were a smoking gun. Judge Holloway looked at the napkin. He looked at Marlowe. "Subornation of perjury." The judge said quietly, "That is a felony, Ms. Bainbridge, and you did it in my courtroom." He turned to the clerk. "Enter the napkin into evidence." The judge leaned back. He looked at the entire Bainbridge family. "I have heard enough," Judge Holloway said. He did not need to deliberate. He did not need to take a recess. "I find that the plaintiffs, Marlowe Bainbridge, Dean Bainbridge, and Cynthia Bainbridge, have acted in bad faith. They have filed frivolous motions. They have abused the discovery process. They have attempted to defraud the estate through identity theft, and they have suborned perjury." The judge picked up his pen. "I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay 100% of the legal fees incurred by the Arthur Sterling Trust and Miss Kara Bainbridge in this matter." He looked at Dean. "I am referring the evidence of the loan forgery and the mobile notary incident to the district attorney's office to be added to the existing investigation." He looked at Marlowe. "And regarding the trust?" Elias Thorne stood up. "Your Honor," Thorne said, "Irongate formally requests that the court enforce the no contest clause. By filing this suit, by claiming the trust was invalid, and by engaging in fraudulent conduct to circumvent it, Marlowe Bainbridge has violated the core condition of her inheritance." Rourke jumped up. It was a reflex. A last-ditch attempt to save the only thing that mattered to his client. The money. "Your Honor," Rourke cried, "we move to withdraw the petition. We withdraw the contest. If we withdraw, the clause is not triggered. We can go back to the status quo." He looked at Marlowe, pleading with her to nod. "To agree." "We drop everything," Rourke said. "Just let the trust stand." Judge Holloway looked at Rourke with a gaze that could have frozen water. "Mr. Rourke," the judge said, "you cannot withdraw a bank robbery after you have been caught inside the vault." The judge opened the trust document to page 3. "The clause is triggered by the act of contesting." The judge said, "It is not triggered by the success of the contest. Your client rolled the dice. She lost. She does not get to take her bet off the table now. I rule that Marlowe Bainbridge has forfeited her entire interest in the Arthur Sterling estate. She is disinherited." Marlowe let out a sound. It was a gasp that turned into a choke. She grabbed the edge of the table. The $12 million, the house, the lifestyle, the future she had already spent in her head, was gone, vaporized by her own greed. But the judge was not finished. He looked at the evidence table. He looked at the sealed evidence bag containing the silver USB drive. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "there is one piece of evidence left." Thorne nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, the audio recording." "I want to hear it," the judge said. "But, Your Honor," Rourke protested weakly, "you have already ruled. The case is over. It is not over until I understand the full scope of this." The judge said, and frankly, after hearing what this family did to a dying man, I think he deserves to have the last word. Thorne walked to the media console. He unzipped the bag. He plugged the silver drive into the court system. A waveform appeared on the screens. a jagged green line of static. I looked at my parents. They were holding hands now, gripping each other tightly. They knew what was coming. They knew what they had done in the dark. And they were terrified of hearing it played back in the light. Marlo was staring at the screen. Her eyes were wide, glassy. She looked like she was waiting for a ghost. Thorne pressed the spacebar. The speakers crackled. There was the sound of a microphone being adjusted, a heavy breath, and then, my grandfather's voice filled the room. It was not the weak, whispered voice I remembered from the hospital. It was stronger. It was angry. "This is Arthur Sterling," the voice said. "The date is November 13th. I am making this recording because I do not know if I will survive the night." The room froze. The air conditioning seemed to stop. Every person in the gallery held their breath. "I am signing the trust papers today," the voice continued, "not because I want to complicate things, but because last night, my family came into my home." There was a pause on the recording, a sound of a man trying to steady his voice. "They brought a notary," my grandfather said, "and while Dean was yelling at me to sign the house over," Marlo leaned down and whispered in my ear. I looked at Marlo. She had stopped breathing. She whispered that if I did not sign the paper, the voice said, crystal clear and terrifying, she would fire Kara. She said she would ruin her career. She said she would make sure my granddaughter never worked in this state again. I felt a shockwave go through me. He had never told me that. He had protected me from that threat. "I am not doing this for the money," Arthur Sterling said from the grave. "I am doing this because they are not a family anymore. They are a pack of wolves, and I will not let them eat the only decent person left in this bloodline." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a truth so heavy that it crushed everything else in the room. Marlo slowly lowered her head to the table. She did not cry. She just covered her head with her arms, trying to hide from the voice that had just destroyed her. Judge Holloway looked at the USB drive. He looked at me. His eyes were soft for the first time. "The court stands adjourned," he whispered. He banged the gavel, and this time, it sounded like a liberation. The recording ended, but the voice of Arthur Sterling seemed to linger in the room like the smell of ozone after a lightning strike. The silence was absolute. It was not the silence of confusion or anticipation. It was the silence of a guillotine blade that had already fallen, leaving the crowd waiting for the head to roll. My grandfather's words, "They wanted me to run. They wanted me to tremble," had stripped away the last layer of varnish from the Bainbridge family portrait. We were not a dynasty. We were not a tragedy. We were a crime scene. Judge Holloway sat motionless for a long time. He looked at the silver drive still plugged into the console. Then he looked at Gavin Rourke, who was staring at his own hands as if he wished they belonged to someone else. "The court is ready to rule," Judge Holloway said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all theatricality. He picked up the trust binder. He held it up, heavy and thick, a physical manifestation of my grandfather's will. "This document," the judge stated, "is confirmed as the valid, controlling instrument of the Arthur Sterling estate. The trustee, Irongate Fiduciary Trust Services, is confirmed as the sole administrator of all assets, including the real estate, the investment portfolio, and the personal effects of the decedent." He turned his eyes to Marlo. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the table, her fingernails digging into the wood so hard the tips were white. Regarding the plaintiff, Marlo Bainbridge, the judge continued, "The court finds that her actions, specifically the filing of this lawsuit, the attempt to access estate funds via identity theft, and the subornation of perjury, constitute a direct violation of the no contest clause." He paused. "The forfeiture is absolute," Judge Holloway declared. "Marlo Bainbridge is hereby removed as a beneficiary. Her interest in the estate is terminated. She will receive nothing, $0, 0 cents. She is to have no access to the properties, no access to the accounts, and no claim on any personal items. Any attempt by her to enter the premises of the Sterling residence will be treated as criminal trespassing." Marlo let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She slumped forward, her forehead touching the table. The quiet luxury was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a woman who had gambled her entire life on a bluff and had just been called. The judge turned to my parents, Dean and Cynthia Bainbridge. The judge said, his voice hardening, "You are ordered to reimburse the trust for 100% of the legal fees incurred during this litigation. That amount currently stands at over $85,000. You have 30 days to remit payment." My father looked up, his face gray. 85,000. He whispered, We don't have that liquid. Then I suggest you liquidate assets, the judge said coldly. Because if you do not pay, I will issue a writ of attachment against your own property. Judge Holloway picked up the yellow envelope that the process server had delivered earlier, the criminal subpoena for my father. And let me be clear, the judge added, this civil ruling is the least of your problems. The evidence presented here today, specifically the mobile notary incident and the forged loan application, is being transferred immediately to the district attorney. The fact that you tried to force a dying man to sign away his home is now a matter for the grand jury. He looked at the entire family one last time. Do not contact the trustee. Do not contact Ms. Kara Bainbridge if I see any of you in my courtroom again, unless it is in handcuffs. It will be too soon. He banged the gavel. It was a sharp, final crack that signaled the end of the war. Bailiff, clear the court. The judge ordered. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I was standing. I looked at Elias Thorne. He closed his notebook with a soft snap. He did not smile. He simply nodded at me, a professional acknowledgement that the job was done. We walked out of the courtroom. I did not look back at my family. I could hear Rourke trying to explain to my father that he could not represent him in a criminal trial. I could hear my mother weeping, asking why this was happening to them. I could hear the silence of Marlowe, which was louder than any scream. We exited into the cool afternoon air of Bristol County. The sun was shining. The world was continuing to turn. People were walking their dogs. Cars were driving by. They did not know that inside that brick building, a family had just been erased. It took 3 days for the dust to settle. 3 days of silence. My phone did not ring. There were no texts from my mother. There were no emails from Marlowe. The judge's warning, combined with the looming criminal investigation, had finally done what years of pleading could not do. It had made them leave me alone. I sat at the kitchen table in my grandfather's house. The house was quiet. It smelled of old books and lemon polish, the same way it always had. But now, the air felt lighter, the shadow of the mortgage fraud, the threat of the quick sale. It was all gone. The red folder lay on the table in front of me. If they sue. I ran my hand over the cover. My grandfather had not left me a heartfelt letter about how much he loved me. He had not left me a video montage of our memories. He had left me this. He had left me a weapon. He knew. I whispered to the empty room. He had known exactly who they were. He had known that his love was not enough to save them from their own greed. So he had stopped trying to save them. And he had focused on saving me. He had built a fortress of paper and law, a structure so rigid that even their wildest lies could not break it. It was not the warm, fuzzy inheritance people write about in books. It was cold. It was hard. But it was the purest form of love I had ever known. He had loved me enough to be brutal. He had loved me enough to document their sins so I would not have to bear the weight of them. There was a knock at the back door. It was a precise, rhythmic knock, 3 sharp raps. I stood up and opened the door. Elias Thorne stood there. He was wearing the same black suit he always wore. He looked like he had not aged a minute since the day he walked into the courtroom. He held a thin file in his hand. Ms. Bainbridge. Thorne said, Mr. Thorne, I replied. Please, come in. He stepped into the kitchen. He did not sit down. He placed the file on the table next to the red folder. This is the final distribution schedule, Thorne said. The house is officially titled in the name of the trust. With you as the sole lifetime beneficiary, the maintenance fund has been fully funded. The taxes are paid for the next 5 years. He opened the file. And this, he said, pointing to a document with a gold seal, is the confirmation of exclusion. What does that mean? I asked. It means the lock is turned. Thorne said, we have flagged every financial institution, every credit bureau, and every property recorder in the state. If Marlo Bainbridge, or anyone sharing her surname, attempts to access, inquire about, or even view the records of this estate, the system will automatically reject the request and notify law enforcement. He looked at me with his gray eyes. You are invisible to them now. Ms. Bainbridge, financially speaking, you do not exist in their world. They cannot touch you. They cannot sue you. They cannot even see you. I looked at the document. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like a shield. And the assets? I asked. Distributed according to the schedule. Thorne said, we do not do advances. We do not do hardship loans. Marlo's share has been absorbed back into the principal. It will be donated to the charities your grandfather selected, the dog shelter, the library, the Veterans Fund. I smiled. It was a small, tired smile. He would have liked that. Thorne reached into his pocket. He pulled out a set of keys. They were the keys to the house, but they were new, shiny. We changed the locks this morning. Thorne said, all of them, even the garage. He placed the keys in my hand. The metal was cool against my skin. He saved me. I said, looking at the keys. Thorne adjusted his cuff. He provided the architecture. Ms. Bainbridge, Thorne corrected, you provided the courage. A trust is just words on a page until someone stands up and enforces it. You stood up. He turned to the door. My job here is done, Thorne said. The account will be managed by a junior officer from now on. You likely will not see me again. I watched him open the door. Mr. Thorne? I called out. He paused. Thank you, I said, for being the receipt. He paused for a second. The corner of his mouth twitched. The closest thing to a smile I had ever seen from him. Accuracy is its own reward. Ms. Bainbridge, he said, and then he was gone. He walked down the driveway, got into his black sedan, and drove away without looking back. He was not a hero. He was a mechanism, and he had functioned perfectly. I locked the door. I turned the deadbolt. The sound was solid. Thunk. I went back to the table. I sat down. I thought about Marlo. I thought about her sitting in her condo, realizing that the check was never coming. I thought about my father, sitting in a lawyer's office, trying to explain why he had brought a notary to a deathbed. I thought about the text messages, the guilt trips, the years of feeling like I was the crazy one for thinking they were using him. I picked up the red folder. I walked over to the fireplace. I did not light a fire. I just placed the folder on the mantelpiece, right next to the urn that held my grandfather's ashes. It stays there. I said to the urn, I was not going to burn it. I was not going to hide it. I was going to keep it there. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that the truth is not a feeling. It is not a story you tell at a funeral to make people cry. It is not a Facebook post with a hashtag. The truth is a timeline. The truth is a signature. The truth is a timestamp on a phone call made at midnight. I looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat in my grandfather's chair. For 33 years, I had been afraid of my family. I had been afraid of their loudness, their confidence, their ability to rewrite reality to suit their needs. I had let them make me feel small because I thought their stories were more powerful than my facts. But my grandfather had taught me the final lesson. When people try to erase you with a story, you do not need to tell a better story. You do not need to scream louder than them. You do not need to play their game. You just need to open the box. You just need to lay the papers on the table. You just need to let the silence do the heavy lifting. Because in the end, the story does not belong to the person who can cry on cue. It does not belong to the person who wears the most expensive suit. The story belongs to the record, and the record was closed. Thank you so much for listening to my story and walking this legal tightrope with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on how the family got what they deserved. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Nina Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the like button to help this story get heard by even more people.